Good morning, it's 4 minutes after 10. Right, sit down, hold on to your hats. Excitement is about to be unleashed onto the airwaves. PMQs is back. Is it still Rishi Sunak? I suppose it is, isn't it? So Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer going toe-to-toe at 12 o'clock today. We will be covering that live, as you would expect. Did you know, the last time I said this on air, I think I'd got it wrong and PMQs wasn't back at all, but we are confident on this occasion that it is. Also later today, you will find out who are the final two contenders in the battle to be the next leader of the Tory party. So who will be going toe-to-toe with Keir Starmer before Christmas of this year? I don't know. We may talk about that in the next hour. I'm tempted to, but I'm not going to lie. It's a little bit hard to get you very excited about it. I may have a way into it that opens up previously unexplored vistas, which is, after all, my job. But let us turn our attention first to the state of the Labour Party. I'll read some of the early texts to come in. I don't understand, James, how you can say that the Labour government is in crisis after the last Tory government. This is tame in comparison. We haven't even had a budget yet. The right-wing media is treating things as if they're worse than the mini-budget under Liz Truss. Unfortunately, there seem to be a lot of sheep buying into it. Jamie writes, massive majority, Tories fighting like rats in a sack, and it's all pretty irrelevant. Panic? No way. It's still early days. And Anthony writes, come on, James, Labour have 5 years. I personally love the fact that they're not pandering to the press on either side and are just taking the decisions they feel they need to take. If you look closely at what they've done, it's all sensible, maybe a little awkward retiming, but they are laying the ground for the budget. Mackie writes, desperate James, still acting as an apologist for Starmer's clown crew. Mate, I haven't said anything yet. Other people have listened to the same 2 minutes of conversation and concluded that I'm describing Labour as being in a state of crisis. But you just knock that scarf a little bit tighter around your neck. How long before you accept that you were wrong yet again? Asks Mackie. I'm referencing probably my appalling misjudgment when it came to how brilliant Brexit is going, what a great Prime Minister Boris Johnson turned out to be, and how suggestions that Donald Trump might be a fascist were proved to be absolutely ridiculous and hyper. But you got me there, Mackie boy. You got me there. But I have got something wrong. I thought that with a new Labour government in place, there would be a slight recalibration of the media in this country. Particularly given some of the things that my texters have referred to. Oh, that's nice from Katie. He's getting the Meghan Markle treatment. Keir Starmer is currently being markled by the media in this country. It's not really working, as the polls attest. His personal approval has plummeted. He is now on a level with Nigel Farage when it comes to how many people don't like him, that's got to hurt, hasn't it? You wouldn't wish that on anybody, honest or sensible. But the party remains roughly where it was on the day of the last general election in terms of voting intentions. There's one poll that's got them a single point ahead of the Tories, but I think the key word there is probably ahead. So you have seen the massed ranks of Fleet Street dinosaurs who turned a blind eye to everything from Boris Johnson's serial depravity. Well, not just a blind eye, who literally described Liz Truss's fiscal catastrophe as the finest budget they had ever seen, or finally a truth. So my presumption was, naively, that a little bit of reality would be restored to proceedings. And I don't know if you've seen the front page of the Sun today. They're trying to pretend that a woman who had been the subject of a suicide terror attack, although they don't mention that on the front page of the paper. They wait until you've actually bought it and turned inside before reminding you of that. A woman who was the subject of a potential suicide terror attack in Vienna only got police protection in this country because Sadiq Khan and Yvette Cooper demanded it. That is what now passes for journalism in the Murdoch-verse. Similarly, you're supposed to be furious about the fact that an Arsenal season ticket holder sits in the director's box for security reasons. Sorry, someone who pays for his own season ticket sits in the director's box for security reasons. So my idea that because they need to be close to power, the mad elements of the media that were responsible, of course, for bringing you everything from Brexit to Liz Truss, the mad elements of the media in this country, the kind of people who were tickling Boris Johnson's toes long after the rest of us had realised exactly what he was. And, of course, some of them continue to tickle Boris Johnson's toes, although that appears to be a dwindling sect. I thought that because they want to be close to power, right-wing media would somehow cut its cloth a little differently, recalibrate. So a message has clearly reached them that it doesn't matter, that they're not going to get any preferential treatment or special treatment from this Labour government. So they may as well continue throwing as much manure at the cabinet and at the Prime Minister as they possibly can. And that is quite an interesting position to take. Keir Starmer never seemed ruthless, did he, in the early days? But if you think about what he achieved in turning around the party from the catastrophic defeat of 2019 into the landslide victory of this year, you realise that he probably was, or you realised some weeks ago that he probably was quite ruthless. Getting rid of Sue Gray is, it's a brutal move. Again, it may not have reached your eyes and ears in that way because the people that told you Boris Johnson was brilliant, Liz Truss was an economic genius and Brexit would make you richer, are probably responsible for the lens through which you've seen the dismissal of Sue Gray. The fact that someone who had become so closely associated with his leadership and his premiership gets shown the door when she becomes the problem, when she becomes the story, speaks of a ruthlessness that I imagine has got people paying attention from the right wing of the British media rather worried. And the idea that reminding people of what went before is somehow a form of whataboutery is, I'd need to build a whole new idiot's corner to accommodate the scale of that idiocy. Oh yes, you shouldn't ever mention previous prime ministers when assessing how good the current one is. Really? How does that work? How do you decide who's better or worse then if you don't ever refer back to the ones that went before? And I mean, yesterday, when he's flogging this book, so you just like every single time Boris Johnson opens his mouth, he still lies. It's quite extraordinary. But none of that necessarily explains the personal popularity. For my money, the big misstep was the winter fuel payment. Not the policy, but the release, the way it was released. Did you know the Conservatives have run an advert about the winter fuel payment in which they appear to have deployed somebody wearing a Rolex watch? So it's not my field of expertise, but people who know more about these matters than I do assure me that one of the gentlemen that they have cited as being an unfair victim of the winter fuel payment withdrawal is wearing a watch worth thousands and thousands of pounds. I was struck by their fridge. I'm a big fan of fridges. I don't want to go all partridge at 12 minutes after 10. I was struck by the size of their fridge and the amount of food that must be in it. But again, you know, if they had approached the winter fuel policy a bit more slowly and begun by declaring how the wealth of people who still get it, rather than allowing the narrative to be set by the other end of the telescope, the people who will be unfairly penalised, I believe, by the winter fuel payment. It fails the Martin Lewis test, which for me, as you know, is probably the most important test when it comes to domestic economics in this country. If Martin doesn't like it, then I don't like it either. But not necessarily for entirely the same reasons. It's just a question of where the threshold is at which you don't get it. But they could have done that much better. They could have done that much more slowly, with much more detail. I think there has been epic naivety, which is actually based upon the same impulse that I had when I suggested to you that because being close to power is a major priority for these people, the right-wing media would recalibrate or recut its cloth. And they haven't. They continue to cheerlead for the still bonkers Tory party, and they continue to throw everything that they can at the Labour Party. So much so that you're now being asked to despise Keir Starmer for not breaking any rules, as opposed to, or see him as being exactly the same when it comes to cronyism and the like, exactly the same as the people that didn't declare their hospitality and lied about what they had received from donors and continue to pretend that what they did was somehow less bad as opposed to more bad than what Starmer did. James Cleverly has been, do you even know, come here a minute, do you even know that James Cleverly has been busted this week, for failing to declare that his wife went with him to two major sporting events? One of them was Wimbledon. I can't remember what the other one was. FA Cup final. failing to declare. It was a mistake. So Keir Starmer's getting a kicking for things that he declared. James Cleverly joins in, and he has been busted in 1 week alone for attending 2 major sporting events with his wife and failing to declare that his wife was with him. Labour is in the process of closing the loophole that lets ministers avoid declaring what hospitality they've received. So this isn't, if you like, an opinion that I'm expressing. This is just counting. So when should panic stations be reached? The loveless landslide that Keir Starmer enjoyed. It was the Women's World Cup final in Sydney where he failed to declare the hospitality received by his wife. As far as I'm aware, James Cleverly is not a season ticket holder for the Women's World Cup final in Sydney. Keir Starmer is a season ticket holder at Arsenal. But remember, don't get cross about that. Get cross about that. I can't spend much more time trying to analyse the moral bankruptcy of people in my line of work who engage in this sort of misdirection and misinformation. It's quite extraordinary to reflect upon how nobody appears to feel even the vaguest pang of guilt for bringing the country Liz Truss's economic catastrophe, Boris Johnson's amoral adventures in Downing Street. God knows how many people might still be alive today if he hadn't been in charge when the pandemic struck. People that told you Brexit was going to be brilliant. It's always the same people. And the idea that they now move blithely on to attacking someone for declaring hospitality received or for doing things in full transparency is almost beyond my ability to understand. I can't see getting a book out of this. Just describing it. It'd be the same chapter again and again and again. Someone broke the rules and they defended him. Someone didn't break the rules and they attacked him. But do you know what Angela Rayner got attacked for yesterday? Buying a suit. Angela Rayner got attacked for buying a suit yesterday. For paying for a suit for her boyfriend with her own money. So last week, she's getting attacked for accepting hospitality from other people or letting her parliamentary colleague, Lord Ali, sits on the Labour benches in the House of Lords. He's a colleague. Last week, she got attacked for letting Lord Ali buy her some clothes. Yesterday, she got attacked for buying clothes herself for her partner, buying a present for her boyfriend with her own money. You think I'm exaggerating? That's not an opinion. That's just counting. What did Angela Rayner get attacked for yesterday? Buying a present for her boyfriend with her own money. God, I think that's outrageous. The Times, Sunday Times, proud socialist Angela Rayner bought boyfriend a suit from Royal Tailor because anybody who believes in a slightly fairer redistribution of wealth should obviously be walking around in their undercrackers, should be walking around in sackcloth and ashes. You suggest that the burden of taxation on the richest people in this country should be a little bit higher, and you are really admitting that you want to spend the rest of your life walking around in your wife fronts, not allowed to buy your own clothes, let alone buy a present for your boyfriend. So, I don't know what's going on. Well, I do know what's going on. I don't know how it ends. And I don't know how those of us who want the government to succeed, and of course you'll remember that I'm so naive and optimistic that I spent 2 hours a few years ago wanting Rishi Sunak to succeed and thinking Rishi Sunak might succeed. And then he put Suella Braverman back in the Home Office. So if you are not a treacherous country-hating traitor. I think that's the language of social media, isn't it? And you actually want Britain to thrive. You want Britain to do well. You want problems to be solved by the people that are going to be in government for the best part of the next 5 years. Then when is it time to worry? How worried should you be now? I'm going to open up the phone lines, but I want to give you quite a specific question to answer. And it's not a very typical or traditional phone-in topic. But I want you to think about it, and I want you to ring me. And I want you to tell me this. Given that much of the British media is now a lost cause, if you can defend somebody who broke the rules and attack somebody who didn't, you surrender your right. You have given up your responsibility to speak truth to power. If you attack someone for receiving clothes as a donation and then attack them for buying them themselves, you have surrendered any semblance of integrity or honesty. It won't be noticed by a lot of people. A lot of people trust liars. That's why Donald Trump might be back in the White House soon. But for those of us who care about the truth, for those of us who care about facts like Keir Starmer pays for his season tickets at Arsenal, but is apparently a right old wrongen compared to Boris Johnson, who couldn't even buy his own dinners when he was Prime Minister and had them delivered by a billionaire donor's wife's company. What do we do? How do we gauge how he's doing? Winter fuel, right idea, wrong implementation, bad timing, poor politics. The rest of it, I couldn't give two figs. You think someone sitting at the bingo in Great Yarmouth tonight even knows who Sue Gray is? Name 5 Downing Street chiefs of staff from the last 100 years. Go on. So how do we know? You can't trust the media. BBC's still terrified of right-wing newspapers. How do we know? I think we'll just ask each other. No? How do you think they're doing? 0345 6060 973. And there are 2 strands to this. There is the plummeting personal popularity of Keir Starmer, which is not, well, the more attention you were paying to his rising popularity. His popularity was based on 2 things, really. He wasn't Jeremy Corbyn and he wasn't a Tory. It now needs to be based on other things. So it was never what you would call deep popularity. It was shallow popularity. Do you prefer him to everything else on offer? Yeah, I do. But that's largely because of everything else that's on offer. So as Keir Starmer's personal popularity plummets and the party stays more or less steady, what would an honest person paying attention with the best interests of the country at heart, so, not a believer of Farage's lies or a immigration obsessive or a far-right rioter or a far-right rioter apologist, what would somebody honest with the country's best interests at heart say about the first 3.5 months of Keir Starmer's government? I think you would struggle to say much that sounded celebratory. So how bad do you think it has been? Or how good? And then you reckon, sorry, it's 21 minutes. Oh, God, I'm in that mood this week, aren't I? What day is it? Wednesday? All day. Is it Wednesday all day? That's 3 days in a row where I'm glancing at the clock and thinking, I'm enjoying this. I could take this monologue up to at least 5:30. But I can't and I won't. But I will end with this question for you. Quick reminder of the phone number, 0345 6060 973. How are you going to judge it? How are you judging it? Because I worry sometimes that we're all forced to look at the world, at least occasionally, through the completely distorting lens of Rupert Murdoch's interests or Viscount Rothermere's interests. And they're terrified of Keir Starmer. So what are you looking at? And what are you seeing? And what do you make of it? 0345 6060 973. 10:24 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The difference is, at long last, we have grown-ups working for us, says Deborah. The only areas where I have to express extreme disappointment with Labour is 1, not pushing harder on reversing elements of Brexit, and 2, a hands-off approach to the Middle East, which has not changed from Rishi. I mean, Aziz, they're pretty huge, aren't they? Don't you think? Morning, James. You, as always, excellent opening monologue. Gave me an idea for your new feature. Perhaps you could call it Misleading Media. Oh, good reminder, Mick. We're coming up with a new name for that later in the programme. And let me find someone who is... Here you go. This is nice. Do you even believe this casserole of nonsense you're spouting? Literally nobody likes or trusts Starmer. You are just his fluffer, and it's pathetic. The problem with that, Rick, is that we have a little button in our studio that we can press to see your history of texts to the programme. I won't embarrass you by reading any of them out, but I think it's fair to say that you don't exactly have an open mind on this, and that your attitude towards people like Boris Johnson and, at the time of the budget, Liz Truss, was rather warmer than your attitude to someone who, so far, is in trouble. Well, you tell me what he's in trouble for. Hasn't broken any rules, has declared everything that he's received, is taking some money away from some of the richest people in the country. Maybe you are of a piece with Aziz and you think that his policy on Israel His failure to ban the export of all arms to Israel is awful. But you need to provide me with a little bit more detail, champ. Liz is in Cricklade. Liz, what's going on?
Good morning, James. Well, I mean, it's sort of a bit like Brexit all over again. The narrative is out. Starmer's the same as the others, and he's hypocritical because he promised he was going to change everything. And when you turn around and say to these people, he hasn't broken any rules, it just doesn't cut through because they've made up their mind. And it's at the moment, it's immovable. And you say, well, look, he did a really good job after the riots. It was really a relief to have someone statesmanly, actually making things, happen and work and sort that mess out. But now it's all about his clothes and his glasses. And it just, at the moment, I can't see that that's going to change. Even though you say, well, Boris Johnson had all of that wallpaper and all of that free
and this is why you mentioned Brexit, because it's a bit like shouting Project Fear with no evidence whatsoever, as opposed to shouting, look, here's what will happen if we leave, and here's my working, and here's the proof, and then being called a liar.
Yeah. And the difference is when Johnson took over, we all knew it was going to be a car crash, but I think we let him have... he had COVID, but we let him have that chance to get on with it. You think, well, the country's voted for it, so we've got to go with this. But that just hasn't happened with Starmer. Right from the beginning, they've gone for him.
Were you surprised by that?
What, that they've gone for him?
Yeah.
Well, no,
well, and also,
I know what the right-wing press are like.
No, well, I do too. I mean, it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine. But I'm surprised how weak the... What's the word? How weak the gruel is. I really am. I mean, I know how tabloid journalism works. I know that portraying someone as being in receipt of something that you're not in receipt of yourself. But the confidence with which these blowhards and these Boris Johnson fanboys pretend that what Starmer has done is in any way comparable, let alone worse than what Boris Johnson did. I guess I'm always surprised by the contempt in which they hold their own consumers.
The thing that's fused it, James, is the winter fuel allowance.
Yeah.
It's that.
Which is
it's
bad.
Sort of like you've taken that from the elderly and then you've got all of those freebies yourself. And that's the problem that the Labour Party have got.
And that's a problem of perception.
It is, but also he wasn't particularly popular going in. He's not got the persona. And it needs... I think that, I was thinking about this before I went to sleep last night, worrying about it, because I am worried about 2029 and thinking at some stage, if it doesn't repair itself, they've got to do which we don't really want, but handing over the baton to somebody that is going to win.
Oh, early days, Liz, early days. Good Lord. You're more worried than I am.
I'm always looking forward, and for us 5 years it's not very long, and I'm just thinking if it doesn't improve, they've got to have a plan because we can't.
But then we're back to all the things we said we didn't want anymore. We're back to kind of beauty contests and personality contests and people who seem like good eggs, and rather than boring bureaucratic pragmatists.
Capital. If he'd gone in and actually said, you know what, I'm going to get rid of these Brexit red lines and move this forward, he would have a much stronger base behind him. But he's lost the room from everybody. Remainers are not happy, which is a large majority of the country now. And he's lost that, he's got nobody really propping him up. Who is he standing for? We don't know. And that's really where he is. So he does need a big step change. And I'm being scary, I guess, because I don't want to change. I don't want to go through another farce of a leadership election. I want him to win the hearts and minds of the people. But he needs to really grab this moment now and get on the front foot and start.
Well, I'm not sure he does. I'm not sure he does yet. I mean, he certainly needs to between now and 2029. But I would not be surprised if they were a lot more worried about the suboptimal state of number 10 Downing Street, which you can chalk up to both inexperience and naivety, one of which is forgivable, one of which perhaps is not, than they are about the state of the newspapers. I coined that word a couple of weeks ago. They don't suffer from front page phobia. Maybe they should actually have a little bit of front page. They should be maybe a little bit more concerned about, you're not allowed to use this word on my programme, optics. But if you're struggling, not Liz, but if anyone is struggling to understand how mad things are, then someone who wasn't outraged by Boris Johnson's behaviour, what on earth can they be cross with Keir Starmer about? So there is the question. If you weren't outraged by Boris Johnson or Liz Truss, or even by Rishi Sunak coming back early from D-Day, I mean, these epic gaffes, these huge disasters, the tripling of your mortgage payments, the lying about gold wallpaper, or he denies it was gold, but tens of thousands of pounds spent tarting up a flat that Theresa May had moved out of the day before, but which he was claiming yesterday looked like a crack den. If you weren't outraged by that, what on earth can you be outraged by that Keir Starmer has done? That's the problem, and that is why it's like Brexit, because as soon as I say that, all of the certainty, all of the outrage disappears. Hey, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you can tell me, hey, I had no problem at all with Boris Johnson's amorality, with Liz Truss's epic incompetence, with Rishi Sunak's awfulness and promotion of people like Suella Braverman, but the reason why I've got it in for Keir Starmer is 0345 6060 973. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 10:35 is the time. That looks absolutely delicious. Nigella's recipe of the day is mussels with yoghurt, dill and crispy chickpeas. I might be having that later. Do you fancy that, Keith? Do you think that would work? How do you get your chickpeas crispy? I don't know. We should probably concern ourselves with that a little later in the day. For now, we're looking at what I suppose, in a way, Liz has sort of piqued me slightly with her Brexit analogy. If you're a proper Labour supporter, I could see why you'd be very disappointed with elements of Keir Starmer's opening as Prime Minister, or mildly disappointed. But if you're not, how on earth can anybody who was comfortable with what went before pretend to be angry about what's happening now? I was fine with the bloke that broke the rules, but I'm not fine with the bloke that didn't. I think that is the perfect illustration of what I struggle sometimes to convey to you about how bent this country is. The idea that people have done nothing wrong. I mean, the winter fuel payment notwithstanding, if the threshold was a little bit higher, the idea that you take money away from people who don't need it and give it to people who do is, I mean, that's humanitarian. It's not even political. But the country that we live in is weird. That's why I wrote How They Broke Britain. And it's very hard sometimes to get a handle on A, what is going on, and B, what should happen next. For example, Sebastian says Starmer needs to go on the attack and humiliate the right-wing papers. They're all idiots. Whereas Mike says, I disagree, James. Starmer should ignore the tabloids, as they'll go for him anyway. As they get increasingly desperate, even their dwindling readership will see how daft they are. And, of course, the other point is that their influence in monetary and numerical terms is comparatively tiny compared to what it used to be. And yet, if you look at Keir Starmer's personal opinion polling, there is no earthly way that would have plummeted to levels comparable with Nigel Farage. And that's bad. And nobody serious wants to be as unpopular as Nigel Farage. But if you're plummeting to those sort of levels, it has to be a consequence of the way that the news is being presented or the way that the news is reaching people. So whether they're buying right-wing newspapers or not, the idea that a bloke who hasn't broken any rules hemorrhages popularity among people who were told not to get cross about a bloke who had broken rules is laughable. So how on earth do the rest of us get a proper handle on what we should and shouldn't be worrying about? Alan is in Manchester. Alan, what would you like to say?
Morning,
Hello,
James. I tell your producer, I'm a councillor in Greater Manchester, and for me it's been frustrating because, you know, what we have done, the government's announced, our government has announced two of the biggest wind farms ever, off Hornsey 3, Hornsey 4. We've announced massive solar farms. We've ended the ban on onshore wind. As your previous caller said, the riots were sorted out within 2 minutes. New law, you know, we've got GB Energy. We're taking the railways back under public ownership. So all that great news has been.
Doctors aren't on strike anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the
railways aren't on strike anymore. I mean, that is probably the best. Sorry, I know it's not your example, but that is probably the best example of what I'm trying to describe. They've caved into the unions, is how you get it served up over your morning cornflakes. But in fact, the doctors' strike and the railway strikes are over, is how it could be more honestly conveyed to the British voting public.
And you know what, James? That was one of the best things he'd done, because I tell you, as I've got family in the medical profession,
right?
I'm telling you, the NHS is, as West Streets is broken.
Yes.
But a lot of our junior doctors, they were looking to go to Australia.
Yes, I know.
And that's it.
We don't know yet if he's stopped the exodus, but my goodness me, it's a lot less likely to happen than it was before they reached an agreement. But you sell that as caving into the unions, pay rises for British workers, down with that sort of thing. But
there was a narrative with the train drivers, as in what they were having a go at is organised labour.
Yes, of course.
And who do you want driving a train? Do you want a skilled professional? And don't forget, James, the train drivers work shifts. They're getting paid for unsocial hours. And too many times now, people are working Saturdays, Sundays, long hours, and they're getting rate. I mean, and this, you should be paid.
I know,
you should be paid,
but it'll never reach the breakfast television programmes or the newspaper columns in that way. And that is something that Keir Starmer knows and understands. So your frustration is more interesting to me now. What have you been frustrated by? Yeah, go on.
The way he has done. Okay, there's the problem there. Obviously, I don't know, but there's been problems. So he's obviously done this sort of reshuffle. Sue Gray has gone to another department. Morgan Sweeney. So he's acted. But, you're never going to please the right-wing media. I wish Keir would take him on with Leveson. I don't see why a tax dodger living in Monaco should actually own a national newspaper, and I don't think someone who was Australian and sold his soul to become a Yank should have that
because he had to become American in order to own media in America, but he's still perfectly entitled to own media in this country. And oddly, it was one of his newspapers, it was the grown-up end of his empire that got crossed this weekend about Angela Rayner buying clothes for her boyfriend with her own money, and it is the cheap end of his empire today that is pretending that a woman who'd been the target of a suicide terror attack in Vienna only got police protection here because Sadiq Khan asked for it. I mean, it's extraordinary how dishonest it is, but it lands, it works, it gets through to people, and that's what Keir Starmer, I don't know if he can afford to ignore it.
Well, the good news is, James, it's in the first 100 days, so you learn from your mistakes. I think it's the old, you want to call them free, was clumsy. Winter fuel allowance, I think words matter. If it is said, we're going to target those who need it most instead of cutting it. And I think actually by their actions, I think more people have applied for the benefits that they've not actually.
That's right. So the worst off people will come out of this policy better off than they went into it.
But it was words matter.
Yeah.
So and it is, don't forget. And the other thing is, we've not been in power for 14 years. And you need to.
Have you been? Can I tell you something weird?
Yeah.
Are you a bit older than me, Alan? I don't want to misjudge you.
I'm 64.
Yeah, so you're 12 years older than me. But I'm in this business, and I have been surprised by the epic dishonesty of the media. Does that make me sound pathetic?
No, because, the thing is, our media, I mean, when you go on about Johnson, I mean, I'll throw another one in. How about the trip to Italy, to a castle owned by an ex-KGB colonel?
Excuse me, there's no such thing as an ex-KGB spy. Vladimir Putin told me that.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's like the mafia. You never leave. You never retire.
It's not as if he put his son in the House of Lords a few weeks later, is it?
Yeah, but then where did the diplomatic protection squad go?
This is the point, though. I mean, and of course, there'll be some half-wit shouting whataboutery about this. So you're simply pointing out what the scale by which you judge the behaviour of a Prime Minister looks like. And if you're going to be giving Keir Starmer a red alert, what the hell would you have given Liz Truss's fiscal event or Boris Johnson's entire premiership?
Yeah, and don't forget, that was 2 days after the NATO summit on the Salisbury poisonings.
Yes, that's true.
When this country was attacked for the second time, it was chemical warfare.
On our sovereign soil by a foreign state. A man to whom it turned out yesterday, Donald Trump was sending COVID tests covertly when his own citizens were struggling to get hold of them. When do you panic?
No, you don't panic. I mean,
when do you panic? When do you? I mean, Liz talks about the 2029 election looming ever closer. The media isn't going to change its tune. Imagine if Keir Starmer actually does something wrong. Imagine the coverage that's going to get. So when do you panic? When do you start worrying?
I think start panicking in 2028 or worrying. But you just have to say, do you want a return to the chaos? And it was chaos.
Of what went before. Chaos. It was chaos being presented to us as the second coming. I mean, if you think I'm surprised by how the media is behaving now, the way in which they reverse ferreted upon the Liz Truss stuff is actually something that even I have to go back and check in my own book that I'm not misremembering or exaggerating how I mean, unbelievably hypocritical it was. The Daily Mail, finally a true Tory budget. The Daily Telegraph, the finest budget of my lifetime. Nigel Farage, the best budget since 1950-something. I mean, absolutely extraordinary. A week later, everyone's mortgages has gone through the roof and they're all pretending they never said it. I mean, genuinely incredible. But those of us who are not victims of either the actual media outlets or the ripple effect through social media, through conversation, how on earth do you get a proper handle on how this government is doing? 0345 6060 973. It's 10:45. 10:47 is the time, and what's fascinating about it is that the vitriol comes from both extremes. It's another parallel with Brexit. So this phrase "red Tories," people who are still loyal to the former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, were always passionately opposed, or were always going to be passionately opposed to Keir Starmer. And of course, the worst thing he can do in their eyes is win power. And then I don't know what the other extreme is in a way, because the idea of attacking Keir Starmer for not breaking rules when you were supremely comfortable with prime ministers who did break rules and who did lie, and that is comical. But we know that comical doesn't mean fatal in British politics. We've known since 2016 that liars can triumph, liars can win. We saw in 2019 that liars can win epic majorities in the House of Commons, and they can crumble incredibly quickly. I don't think that they can crumble as quickly, even if the majorities are of a similar size, if people are just telling the truth. But then we're back to that word that you're not allowed to use on this programme, and that word is optics. I don't know what you do to decide how well they're doing if you're doing it entirely independently and you're reliable upon news outlets that told you Brexit was going to be brilliant, austerity was all Gordon Brown's fault, Liz Truss was an economic genius, Rishi Sunak was very, very, very different from what had gone before. Boris Johnson was the new Winston Churchill. And I'm supposed to be cross with Keir Starmer for what now? 03456060973. There's the number you need. 10:49 is the time. Jackie's in Stuttgart. Jackie, what would you like to say?
Well, just say that I think, if anything, Starmer, in my opinion, has gone up rather than down.
Well, you are, I mean, in a very lonely minority when you say that.
Do you know what? I don't think I am. I think being outside of the UK and looking in and not being influenced by the likes of the Express and the Murdoch press, and I'm really sorry to say Sky News and the BBC, I think makes a difference. Starmer went into this job with his eyes wide open, and there was a concerted effort by the last Tory government to break as much as possible in the last 2 years that they were in power.
Do you think so?
It had become really obvious that people had had enough, and that they were highly unlikely to win the last general election. And they just seemed to go around just doing
So
as
let the
much
strike,
as
the
they
teachers,
could
of
to
course.
make it really, really difficult for the next government.
Teachers have accepted a pay rise as well, so they let all these strikes drag on.
They let
All
them
the
drag
damages
on,
that they do. The
they've done
doctors'
water
strike makes the
thing,
waiting
everything.
lists longer. They made it impossible for people to come here via legal routes, so that irregular immigration
So
went
the
through.
next government were going to have to take some really unpopular decisions. They were going to have to take some really unpopular measures to get the country back on an even keel. Before they can start even making things better, they've got to stop things from getting worse. And that means taking some unpopular decisions, like with the winter fuel allowance. I'm on side with that. As long as they make sure that the people who really need it are getting
it's Martin
it.
Lewis. Martin Lewis says they've got it wrong. They've done some of their sums wrong. And for me, I don't want to become a sort of cult follower of Martin Lewis, but I don't think he's ever put a foot wrong, really. And if he says they've got some of the sums wrong, the threshold is in the wrong place, you've got to hope they fix some of that come the budget.
If that's the case, then they have to fix it. But at the same time, as the previous caller said, what they're doing is actually, at the end of this, it's probably going to cost them more money, in that more people who need benefits and weren't claiming them will be.
So the people, well, we can say with confidence, the people who were worse off will end up better off. Or many, or most of the people who went into this policy worse off will end up better off. James has added prisons to the list of things that they deliberately. You could argue that we're deliberately
everything.
allowed to deteriorate.
It wasn't a scorched earth policy, James. It was a salted earth. It was to make things as bad as possible and would stay as bad as possible for as long as possible.
And then they come out and pretend to be outraged about him going to football matches or having some spectacles bought for him.
Yeah,
but you
what
must see
Starmer's
how
done is
that
taken
works, though. People
Well,
are
he's taken
genuinely
these
cross.
decisions now.
Yeah.
He's taken them now at the beginning. Get it out of the way. Get these horrible decisions that are going to really annoy people. Do it now, and hopefully in a year, 18 months' time, we'll start to see the benefit of that. So in 4 or 5 years' time, by the time the next general election comes, people will start to see an improvement.
Well, we shall see. You're more hopeful perhaps than the first caller. So where I suffer from footballification is, I think, in newspapers. I think that I have my scarf tied so tightly around my neck when it comes to the influence of newspapers.
The media has been disgusting with him. I don't know.
Yeah, but how much does it matter? So what does he
on.
do? What does he do? Does he take them on?
No, I think he's doing the right thing by just ignoring them, by not being bullied by them, by not letting them affect what he's doing. He has a clear vision of what needs to be done, and he is not going to let Murdoch or any of the rest of them interfere with that. He's just focused on the job that needs to be done, and the press can whistle for it. They're not getting in his favour, and he's not going to be cowed by them.
The problem here, of course, is that, and I'm not allowed to use the word optics on this programme, so well done me for not using the word optics at all on the programme today. But some good people care about some of the stuff that we're talking about. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. Some good people in America believe that Haitians in Springfield, Ohio are eating cats and dogs. You can mock them for their credulity, but you will sound condescending. Not you, me, anyone. But they are decent people and they believe this stuff. So some decent people believe that Keir Starmer has done something wrong in the context of receiving gifts. And somehow the behaviour, the immeasurably worse behaviour of Boris Johnson didn't touch the sides of their disapproval. So how does he deal with that? Does he just have to try to rise above that? Does he have to ignore that? Or can he tackle it?
I think for the moment, I think he's just got to try and rise above it. But yeah, I think one of the reasons that the sections of the media are so on the attack is there are a lot of people who are very, very worried about what is to come in the future when he looks at the media influence, when he looks at the Russia report, all of these things that are all kind of loosely
There are a lot of
involved
ticking time bombs potentially.
And I think there are a lot of people who are very, very worried about what the future might bring. And so if they can bring him down and have someone who sees Starmer being brought down by the press, who will be more reluctant to really put them under scrutiny, then that's to their benefit.
So try and
not the country's.
just sort of cow him into inactivity. Yeah. And well, that's a great analysis. There's 2 or 3 different elements of it, of course. The idea that the Tories deliberately salted the earth, that's the phrase you use, isn't it? So that your defeated enemy, your vanquished enemy can't regrow crops, whether you're looking at the railways, whether you're looking at the NHS, whether you're looking at teachers, whether you're looking at the water companies, whether you're looking at immigration, whatever it may be, the Tories did seem... I always thought it was through incompetence. I don't want to give them the credit of actually having had an evil master plan to make everything worse on purpose because the other lot were going to be in charge soon. It could be both, I suppose. It doesn't have to be either or, but you'd struggle to argue with Jackie's analysis on what Labour inherited. So the idea that you go from inheriting the mother of all messes to being attacked for receiving spectacles from a very rich colleague is incredible. But that's where we are. I mean, how on earth, this is incredibly self-referential, even by my standards, how on earth someone who wrote a book called How They Broke Britain, 1/3 of which is about how mad, corrupt and dangerous our right-wing media is, can have been surprised by the mad, corrupt and dangerous behaviour of our right-wing media is actually a source of some embarrassment to me. I suppose it's my natural optimism coming and kicking me in the proverbials again, isn't it? Jackie, thank you. Gareth is in Newport. Gareth, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. I think, interestingly, your point, your book and the right-wing press, it should not have come as a surprise to Keir either.
No, that's true.
And so, I think for a lot of us, obviously, the Telegraph lot and the Momentum lot will be, there will be vitriol. But I think for a lot of us who potentially get most of our news from papers like The Guardian and places like your book and centrist podcasts, there's quite a lot of disappointment and concern.
Yes, there is.
And I think disappointment and concern from our surprise that Keir hasn't done a better job of sort of foreseeing some of the challenge that would come his way.
Some of the holes in the road that he didn't see.
Well, exactly. And, interestingly, I listened to a podcast with Jordan Peterson, of all people, talking to Piers Morgan.
Oh, Lord.
And Peter said to Piers Morgan, is Keir Starmer going to effectively, break the country? And Piers Morgan said, well, look, he's a decent guy, he's a good manager, and he's competent, and no, he won't. And, I think for those of us who don't share the politics of either those two people, there's a concern that he
should have seen a lot of this coming. Yeah, so that was the thing he was supposed to be, was the competent pragmatist with that surprising side order of ruthlessness. So how could he have been taken by surprise? I have a theory on this. You may or may not be surprised to learn. I think that, and this is where my naivety is perhaps less forgivable than Keir Starmer's, I think that because in opposition they cultivated contacts and thought that they had cultivated trust and honest brokerage. Starmer would do phone-ins with people or sit down for chats with people. And remember, his people would reach out to people. So the members perhaps of the Sunday Times staff who they thought that they had healthy relationships with, fruitful, potentially symbiotic relationships with. And, of course, the order comes from upstairs and the same people are attacking him for wearing spectacles that someone else paid for. I think that they thought that ground game would be more meaningful. And in a previous political age, it would have been more meaningful. Yes. But things are so bent now that they were on a hiding to nothing by thinking that they could actually build bridges with traditional media enemies.
100%. But my concern is that that's the slight political naivety or great political naivety, and that seems to be part of the problem that they've got. And
that they need to sort that out sharpish. So he can demonstrate ruthlessness with his own people and his own party, whether it's Diane Abbott or Sue Gray or Jeremy Corbyn. He's got that ruthless streak, but he has struggled so far to apply it to media saboteurs.
Yeah, but part of his problem as well is, I mentioned to your producer, he has got a ruthless streak. He's known for that, but he also has had, for want of a better word, a bit of a sanctimonious streak.
That's true.
And I think that could be part of his problem.
And that's why some of the freebie stuff landed so hard.
It's landed so hard. And, people knew that Boris Johnson was a moral libertarian. And so, to a certain extent, Boris has got some wallpaper put up.
Libertine rather than libertarian, I think.
Yeah, well, maybe that's better put. But I think people thought, so what with Boris? And people will not give Keir that benefit of the doubt.
You're not supposed, and it doesn't matter. I mean, then rules become, rules schmools. So what? I don't care whether he broke the rules or not. He shouldn't have taken the glasses, shouldn't have taken the suits, and then bizarrely, the decision to give back £6,000 worth of donations because he didn't need to, but felt that he could have been presented as a positive. Do you know, I have thought about this, and I can actually see why people are cross with me, even though I didn't break any rules. I'm not going to compare myself to the scumbags that went before. I'm going to respect your unhappiness with me and give back the money. But the idea of the message reaching the people via the media that set fire to their story in the first place would be optimistic. We'd need another word, wouldn't we, that goes beyond optimistic. We'll turn our attention to the next lot next. The way I'm going to phrase the question about the Tory leadership campaign is, who do you think is going to win? Well, no, let's do this. Who do you think would be best for the Tory party out of the three remaining candidates? And who do you think would be best for you and me on this programme? So who would be good for the country? Who would be best for Britain? And who would be best for business? It is 5 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next to the Conservative Party. And the question of who you think will be best for Britain and who you think will be best for business. And by business, I don't mean international or domestic commerce. I mean you and me. I mean the time that we spend together. So one of the great tragedies and contradictions of my professional life has been the fact that nothing has been better for my career than Brexit. In fact, the next time someone asks you for a Brexit benefit, you could say, well, it made James whatever he is today, whatever that is. It's not necessarily something that people who voted for Brexit would offer up as a benefit. Generally speaking, certainly not people who still think it was a good idea. Bless the little cotton socks. But it is unfortunately just true. And similarly, some Tory MPs over the last few years have been very good for business. They sort of, if you subscribe to the old adage that there's no such thing as bad publicity, then people like Nadine Dorries have been essentially PR geniuses when it comes to inflating my own importance. I would argue far beyond what it should be. But when one of the front runners to be the next leader of the Conservative Party decides to talk about you on stage at the Conservative Party conference while bidding for the support of delegates and members, you could be forgiven for allowing that to go to your head and think that you're more important than you actually are. And then similarly, brilliant for business in the way that pointing out the really mad stuff was something we could do here, which for reasons I still don't understand wasn't happening in many other places. It wasn't happening in many other parts of the media. So, not exclusively by any stretch of the imagination. Channel 4 News did some great work. BBC, sadly, with some glorious exceptions like Victoria Derbyshire and Michelle Hussein and others, really did hold power to account. But some of the others, I'm afraid, were too desperate to retain access to the likes of Boris Johnson to ever ask them difficult questions. So I'm thinking of Nadine Dorries not knowing how Channel 4 was funded while talking to the Media Select Committee about the funding of Channel 4. You think back to, who would be the other great examples? The idea of Mark Francois. Do you remember him? Having serious sway in the Parliamentary Conservative Party. Brexit hardman, the hardman of Brexit, Steve Baker. I mean, the number of comical incompetence in the Tory ranks over the last few years is probably, after Brexit, the best thing that has ever happened to me. Now you could imagine how hard it would be to pretend that anything, as we proved in the last hour, anything that's gone on under Labour merits even the slimmest scintilla of comparison with what went on under the Tories, particularly if you concentrate upon corruption and cronyism. Desperate attempts by right-wing tummy ticklers to pretend that Labour is in some way comparable to the people that they never criticised. I mean, it is obviously comical. But if you take corruption and cronyism as your guiding lights, as your lodestars, then the Tory party was the gift that kept on giving. And then the incompetence. So corruption, cronyism and competence, the three C's. There is a fourth, but Ofcom prevent me from suggesting to you what that might be. So corruption, cronyism and competence. I think even things like Rishi Sunak, who wasn't a particularly incompetent politician, Rishi Sunak not having an umbrella with him when he announced the next general election. Just for a minute, and this is a bit of whataboutery, but imagine how the media outlets that are going after Angela Rayner for both accepting clothes from a donor and spending her own money on clothes, which leaves her, I don't know where it leaves her in terms of clothes, what clothes she is allowed to possess or purchase for others. Imagine what that kind of media energy would look like if it was being directed at what went on under the last lot. I mean, it is genuinely extraordinary, isn't it? I don't know how much we know about these people. James Cleverly was up to his ears in Boris Johnson's corruption and cronyism. Was it Cleverly? Or, I forget, but I didn't know. Maybe that. You see what I mean? Nadine Zahawi ended up being Chancellor and then had to stop being Chancellor because he hadn't told the Prime Minister that he was being... In fact, I think he tried to sue people that were reporting he was being investigated by the tax authorities. They were just unbelievably awful. I worried when they were out of power that we wouldn't be able to talk about them anymore, but that would be like not talking about the Roman Empire if you were trying to track the history of debauchery. So good for business. Who's going to be best for business? I think it's probably, of the three who are left, it's probably going to be one of the two that seem to be... Have we got the Mariah Carey thing as well? Have we got the Mariah Carey thing? Can I have the Mariah Carey thing as well so it works a bit better? If we're going to be looking at what's best for business, for our time together every morning, and remember, if you're not here every morning, I need a note off your mum by the end of morning break. I think it's going to be different. The one that we think would actually be best for Britain, and I don't know what we mean by that because it's quite hard to put policy clear blue water between them. They all seem to be singing from very similar hymn sheets. James cleverly stood up in front of the Conservative Party conference and said, we need to be less weird, which is true, but his two remaining rivals, Honest Bob Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch, are both quite weird. Badenoch probably slightly weirder than Jenrick. Jenrick more sinister, perhaps, than Badenoch. I don't know. I'm interested in your thoughts on this. But James cleverly is, he is, isn't he? He is measurably more allied to what has gone before. So the idea that the man who held the biggest and highest offices under the last lot, or the lot before, is best qualified to lead the party away from where it has been, should, in a normal universe, be hilarious, shouldn't it? What was his last job? Was it? I mean, he was Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary, wasn't he? And yet he thinks he's the one to sort of start a brave new dawn, a brave new world. It's a new dawn and a brave new world, isn't it? So what do you think? And what do we know much about the differences between them? Do we know much? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I want you to answer both questions. I think there's probably going to be a broad consensus on who we think is going to be the best for Britain. But you need to tell me what you mean by that and why. All right? I know this is a little bit unfair because you're not that engaged in it all and you don't know that much about any of them except the gaffes. And of course, where Badenoch rises head and shoulders above the other two is not just by making gaffes, but by giving an interview in which she explained with incredible arrogance, and if there's anything I'm an expert on, it's arrogance, incredible arrogance about how she never needs to apologise because she never makes gaffes, and she has spent the rest of the leadership campaign with both feet in her mouth. It's quite extraordinary, whether she's talking about maternity cover or indeed being working class because she once worked in McDonald's, or becoming working class the minute she walked through the door of McDonald's to begin her first shift. So gaffes are okay. But making lots of gaffes while also boasting about never making gaffes is why, if I had to pick at the moment, I think Badenoch would be best for business. I think we'd have a lot more fun, wouldn't we, with Kemi Badenoch? See, there's nothing funny about painting over cartoons in a processing centre for unaccompanied child asylum seekers. That's like the child catcher out of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang levels of evil. I don't know about you. I don't know which villain in children's films haunted your childhood and indeed much of your adolescence, but for me it was always the child catcher out of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And when my kids were of an age to watch it, I almost didn't want them to watch it because I was so traumatised by that one single character. In a children's film, you can't compare it with Freddy Krueger or Jason out of Friday the 13th. That was a children's film. The idea that you could be horribly traumatised by an entertainment designed for children. But Jenrick's a child catcher, right? That's not funny. Badenoch has, and this is often professional suicide for politicians, Badenoch has become ridiculous, truly ridiculous. Not just the comments about maternity leave and McDonald's making her working class, but crucially, the interview in which she insisted that she never makes any gaffes, in the same breath as making a massive gaffe. So I think that she'd probably be better for business, but I want you to know why. Hilton points out none of those three would be good for Britain. So, all right then, clever clogs. Least bad. So it doesn't have to be what's best for Britain. Who would be least bad for Britain? And I don't know what you mean by that. Do you mean because we need robust opposition to democracy? We need someone who at least joins in the return to reality that the Labour Party is trying to undertake, as in politics based upon things that are true and things that can and will happen, as opposed to constant sloganeering and fantasy unicorn chasing? Or is it something more nuanced than that? Who is it going to be? Who is going to be best for British politics? All right? 0345 6060 973. And which of them is going to be best for this programme and the fun that we often have together? Well, who is going to fill the space left by hard man of Brexit, Steve Baker or Digby Pudding Jones, or all of the contributors to unhinged headlines? Who of the three is most likely to delight us with their awfulness for the next 5 years? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. Just to drive home the point about being good for business on this programme, here is a couple of exiles, two of the front runners in the Tory leadership campaign from the last fortnight alone. I think Mariah Carey probably puts it best. Why you so obsessed with me? Here's Robert Jenrick.
And then, there's David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary. Living proof that there is a more annoying LBC presenter than James O'Brien.
And here's Kemi Badenoch.
I was working class, and I don't care how many sort of private school people tell me, laugh, like James O'Brien, for instance, who's one of your colleagues, who seem to think it was very funny. I don't need to take lessons from somebody who went to Ampleforth. I know who I am.
And here's Mariah Carey. Why you so obsessed with me? Oh, and speaking of people who went to Ampleforth, do you remember this woman?
James O'Brien. I think if you search the number of times I've tweeted James O'Brien, I think you might find it's 2. If you search the number of times James O'Brien has persistently tweeted me, to the point where we had at my office a number of years ago, probably about 18 months, 2 years ago, had to write to Global complaining that his behaviour was stepping into the realms of harassment. That was at the point which I sent that tweet. If you search James O'Brien's tweets of me... I have searched that, because at the other committee... Including the ones at the other committee, you said that you'd responded to abuse from him, and I have actually searched that. And I can't find this abuse that you talk about, but I have found you asking for James O'Brien to get the sack. You also implied that he had mental health problems. You said, I don't think he's a well man. He needs removing from his platform abuse. And you said, separate tweet, you said, I've had to email his employer a number of times. Now, I don't think it's appropriate for you as a politician to be trying to get somebody the sack. But let's move on to another tweet that you sent. Can I answer that? Please do. So, Mr. Chairman, just what I'd say is that, along with a number of female politicians, I am subject to a small number of men who do tweet about me obsessively, aggressively, and pleasantly, and James O'Brien is one of them. Well, I can't find those tweets that you mentioned, but here's something that you did retweet about, and I'll quote it. I believe James O'Brien of LBC fame is a hate preacher, a liar, a misogynist, a UK hater, and an apologist for Islamic atrocities. You're in no position to talk about James O'Brien saying offensive things about you. You tweeted that. I mean, apart from being actionable and defamatory, it's grotesque.
It turns out it is libellous, but unfortunately she enjoys parliamentary privilege at those select committee hearings. And although it happened on Twitter, the complications involved in bringing a case, and indeed the potential costs, would have been a distraction too far. But so I play that partly because it is so funny and she's so mad. And she's also lying through her teeth and presumably too thick to realise. I play that because we're never going to get those days back. And it's a shame in a way. We're never going to have another Nadine Dorries. We're never going to have a politician so absolutely, categorically and catastrophically awful, clearing off to the jungle and then criticising other people, resigning and then not resigning, having the mother of all hissy fits about not getting into the House of Lords, libelling your favourite radio presenter routinely, lying about her own treatment on Twitter, trying disgustingly to put herself in some sort of victim category when she has called an entirely innocent party all sorts of names. And then being too thick to realise that if you go and search, someone might. Why don't you go and search and see all the evidence of what I'm claiming? Okay, I've searched, you're lying. I just extraordinary to think that someone like that could become Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. So we're never going to get that. That's what I mean by good for business. Do you know how obsessed they are with me? I have forgotten which one it was that I did threaten to sue because someone had gone on a fundraising page for Matt Hancock jumping out of an aeroplane with a parachute. Oh my days, I'd forgotten all this stuff. This did happen, didn't it, Keith? I didn't imagine that. Did I dream this? So Matt Hancock was offering to jump out of an aeroplane with a parachute. I know what you're thinking. So someone went on his fundraising page and wrote something rude and pretended that their name was James O'Brien. And then another Tory MP went again on social media and accused me of being disgusting because of what this anonymous person, who may have been called James O'Brien, but definitely wasn't me, had written on Matt Hancock's fundraising page for jumping out of an aeroplane with a parachute. I did actually threaten to sue her. I think I said, I'm going to sue you in the morning. And at that point, the Conservative Whip's office would have been on the phone telling her I've forgotten who it was. I actually don't know who it was. There's so many of them. We're so mad. So that's what I mean by good for business. So which one's going to be good for Britain? Honest Bob Jenrick? James Cleverly? Who I don't think has ever demonstrated a level of obsession with me, but you never know. I might have missed it. Or Kemi Badenoch, and which one is going to receive the Nadine Dorries trophy for being best for business on the James O'Brien programme? Is it going to be A, Honest Bob Jenrick, the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang Child Catcher Tribute Act? Is it going to be B, James Cleverly, the walking advertisement for nominative determinism? Or is it going to be Kemi Badenoch, who manages to give an interview in which she commits countless gaffes while also boasting about never committing gaffes? Which one is going to be best for Britain, best for British politics, best for democracy, best for Parliament, and which one is going to receive the Nadine Dorries trophy for being best for business on this radio programme? 24 minutes after 11, PMQs on the way, of course, at 12. Natasha will be joining me shortly before that, not only to tee up what is likely to happen at PMQs, but also, of course, to bring us up to speed with developments in the Tory leadership battle, about which I struggle to make you care. I told you last time we did this that it's probably breaking all the rules of radio, but I struggle to make you care. But today I want you to care. I want you to give it some thought, and I want you to tell me, I want you to answer one or two, but ideally both of these questions. Of the three remaining candidates in the Tory leadership campaign, who would be the best for British politics and or democracy? And who would be the best for the mischief-making element of this programme? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need, all right? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Rob's in Penrith. What a beautiful part of the world. I wish I was in Penrith. Rob, what would you like to say?
Well, it's raining at the moment, James.
Yeah,
so
but it's
I'm not
raining
really
on beauty, isn't it?
It is. Well, James, what an appalling choice before us.
How dare you say that? You're supposed to be cross about spectacles.
Well, but there we are. Yes, what a difference. But of these three, I think there's one that really ticks both boxes for you. And I think Badenoch comes straight out of the Liz Truss school of politics, in that she seems completely insensitive to what's going on around her and doesn't seem to realise the impact of what she says makes. She comes out with these outrageous statements and doesn't seem to understand what she's saying. And she's bound to conduct culture wars against everybody. And
I think she's the Tufton Street candidate. I think she's the one with the closest links to these weird lobby groups, secretly funded lobby groups that call themselves think tanks and inexplicably get invited onto every programme under the sun except this one. So that fits the Truss model. Yes. Not being aware of anything going on outside of that weird echo chamber fits the Truss model.
But the thing is, I think that she'll turn the electorate so much off the Tory party that the Tory party will become risible, even more so than it is now.
But we don't I don't think we want that, do we?
Oh, I do. I think what I'd really like to see as an opposition is the rise of the Liberal Democrats. And I'd like to see the Tories utterly discredited. I mean, after the last 14 years, James, they don't deserve to be the opposition, to be honest. They're an utter disgrace.
Right, but then we're back to the first hour of this morning's programme and the reasons why that is not so clear to many as it is to you because of the cheerleading and the distorting lenses that are being applied to everything that goes on. So what is it? Because I will leave Cleverly out of it for the moment because I think that the competition for being best for business on this programme is between Honest Bob Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch. And the reason why you prefer Badenoch has got something to do with that sense of being unhitched or unhinged, that
Yes.
sense of not understanding the relationship between actions and consequences, whereas Jenrick arguably understands it all too well. He's shed all of his pro-Remain moderate politics in pursuit of power, which he believes involves being very Brexity and very, very right-wing. That demonstrates an understanding, albeit a very cynical understanding, of the relationship between actions and consequences. Badenoch, I think, is yet to demonstrate any understanding of that.
Yes, you said cynical and sinister this morning.
Did I?
And I can. Yes, you said.
Oh, I
you
like
said
that.
both
I'll say
those
that.
things.
I'll say that again, Rob. I can tell you now.
Yes.
It's
And
especially
I
if he
can only
wins.
think. I can only think back to him trying to change the rules so that his pornographer friend Raymond,
Desmond on this occasion.
yes, Desmond, is it? That's
Yes,
right.
Richard Desmond.
Could make a tax killing at the expense of the local authority that he was trying to.
Do you know, every call today is proof of the pudding that we were eating together in the first hour, isn't it? Of all the things that these Tories have done, the idea that you're supposed to be getting cross about whatever it is you're supposed to be getting cross about, the spectacles or Angela Rayner buying a suit for her boyfriend, when you're absolutely right. The behaviour of Jenrick in that instance was roundly criticised. I don't want to say anything out of turn, but I think it was even described as unlawful, wasn't it? Here you go. Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick has accepted that he approved the £1 billion East London housing development unlawfully.
That's
Unlawfully right. Helping a Conservative Party donor avoid paying around £40 million in tax. But hey-ho, Keir Starmer had some spectacles bought for him by someone else. So yeah, cynical and sinister versus unhinged and hilarious.
That's right. But I think she knows not what she does sometimes.
Well, she is running her Tory leadership campaign from the house of a wealthy donor, of course, associated with the so-called Institute of Economic Affairs, with the Restore Trust grouping that gets very cross about the National Trust, displaying the history of National Trust properties at National Trust properties, and the Net Zero Watch lobby group, which, well, you don't need me to explain what that is. So your first point about being Liz Truss 2.0 is certainly powerful. And, of course, she hasn't declared that, despite jumping up and down about Keir Starmer using the flat of the Labour Lord Wahid Ali in the run-up to the July the 4th general election. Am I to take from this, then, that you think Cleverly would be better than the other two?
Well, the thing about Cleverly is, use the cliche, is tarred with the brush of all that went on in the last 14 years. However, he's a more consummate politician, I think, than the other two.
He was one of the earliest recipients of the curse of O'Brien as well, actually, when I met him and I liked him, which is why I don't meet politicians. Because if I meet them and I like them, Rob, then I cannot give them the treatment that they deserve on the programme. It's a weakness of mine. Some people are perfectly capable of breaking bread and being all chummy and shaking hands, and then when they're not in the studio, being absolutely vile about them. But I can't. Well, I can, but I find it very difficult. And Cleverly, I did, would you believe of all things, I sat on the one-show sofa with James Cleverly about 100 years ago, and I liked him. And that's why I do think that if you want the Conservative Party to return to being sane and valuable to this country, and you may not even like that analysis, he'd be the one, which means he probably won't win. Thank you, Rob. It's 11:31. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. It is 11:34. A few of you are not playing this game in good faith. In fact, almost all of you, if you're playing it at all, are not playing it in good faith. When I say best for Britain, I mean best for democracy, parliamentary democracy, British democracy. So reasons why you want Kemi Badenoch to win the Tory leadership election that would leave Labour in power for the rest of our lives are not things that are good for democracy or parliamentary democracy. But Gareth in Manchester has not heeded that warning. Says, for me, the best for Britain would be Kemi Badenoch. She won't be able to out-reform, and she will push more centrist voters towards the Lib Dems or Labour. Quite a few people going down that line of thinking that the worst candidate winning would be best for the country. But that's not the angle I'm taking on the programme. Charlie says, your judgment is spot on, re the Conservative leadership battle, but Cleverly is the best of a bad lot. Brian says, I think that they're all equally poor, James, but the best for the show, the best for business would be Honest Bob. the idea that he could somehow bite any chunks out of the Labour Party appears to be something that very few people believe, except, of course, those that are supporting him in the Parliamentary Conservative Party and indeed the Parliamentary National Party. And a few of you are reminding me about the time James cleverly joked about administering Rohypnol to his own wife, which again, it's not career-ending, but could you imagine if the man getting it in the neck for wearing spectacles paid for by someone else had made jokes about giving Rohypnol to his own wife? Could you imagine what they'd be doing? This is not whataboutery. This is an illustration of how much contempt the people in charge of providing you with information largely have for you. So James cleverly did joke about giving Rohypnol to his own wife. Now, look, and it was not a joke among his closest friends at the golf club or whatever the excuse people use for vile conduct when they get busted is. And I don't know that it should have ended his career. I personally not sure that it should have done, but I don't have any personal experience. If any of that horror had come into my family, the idea that the man in that position of power, I think he was Home Secretary at the time, could make a joke like that would probably want me to call for him to be out of office. But it barely touched the sides. People pretending to be furious about Keir Starmer going to the football and sitting in slightly different seats from the ones that he's paid for. That's the story that they're getting cross about. He's sitting in different seats from the ones that he paid for at a football game. But it's absolutely fine for the next leader of the Conservative Party to have joked about giving his own wife Rohypnol. You know what his mates call him? Spike Milligram, apparently. Tim is in Ellesmere Port. Tim, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello. I came to answer your two questions.
That's the spirit. That's how it works. Yeah. That's how it works, Timothy. Well played. Oh, sorry. What have you got?
No, don't worry. I was going to say similarly in that I do believe that best for business in terms of the comedy value, well, James cleverly is not. It is a tight race between the other two.
Yeah.
But in terms of what's best for the country,
yes,
I'm actually going to give a fairly similar answer in that I think what's best for the country is for people to see quite how ludicrous and quite how toxic particularly Kemi Badenoch and Bob Jenrick are.
Yeah.
Let them break the Conservative Party. Let them...
So the death throes aren't over then? The death throes of the post-Brexit party, which was always doomed because it was built on a lie, and Rishi Sunak seemed to be in with a chance of being the last chapter in that collapse, but he's not, is he? He's probably the third last chapter in that collapse.
So I think there's certainly going to be one more, possibly two. I think in terms of what's best for democracy would be to allow them to drive the Conservatives to that kind of split where you have to have the more moderate, more centrist, more sensible group with an interest in democracy in the country.
When's that going to happen, do you think? Because that then leaves the far right clear for Farage and his mates, doesn't it?
Yeah, and as I said, the other side is let the far right split. Let them make the noise and let them fade out as people realise that that's all they are. They're just noise.
Until they're not, mate, to be honest with you, as some other European countries are discovering, and as America has discovered in glorious Technicolor and may yet, of course, discover again next month. But yeah, so in terms of genuinely, so not being disingenuous and ignoring the parameters of the question, it would be best for the country, for the Conservative Party to destroy itself from the inside and then start rebuilding again from the bottom up. And it's not going to do that under any of these three. But it is most likely to destroy itself completely under Badenoch.
Yeah, so that's more or less what I'm saying.
I think you're probably right, actually. And I probably agree with you. And if you do come from the position of wanting a party back that could provide a home for a David Gauke or a Dominic Grieve or a Rory Stewart or an Anna Soubry or a Ken Clarke or a Nicholas Soames or a John Major, or a Philip Hammond or even a Theresa May, you want a party that could provide a home for them, then it is probably going to have to be a scorched earth project. And James Cleverly is not going to be scorched earth. He's going to be holding pattern. Badenoch could be scorched earth. I don't know. It's only the second most important vote of the day, of course, the vote for the next Conservative leader. One more falls out of the running today, and we'll find out who, I think, on Sheila's watch at 12:30. The most important vote of the day is the vote for what we're going to call our new feature on this programme. It is a regular feature that we are not intending to forget about by the end of the week, as we usually do with newly launched exciting regular features. We don't know what the sound effect can be, albeit that the last time I asked for a sound effect was 10 weeks ago and it still hasn't arrived yet. You know, when the newsagents ask for something, they get it half an hour before they asked for it. I don't know if you listen to the Newsagents podcast. If Emily Maitlis asks for something in this building, she gets it half an hour before she asks for it. I've seen her sit down at her desk to discover a cup of tea that was made half an hour later, because they were so keen that it'd be hot when she sits down at her... You come in, you ask for a sound effect, and they've got it half an hour before they asked for it. I asked for a sound effect for Idiot's Corner, just like a slamming door or something like that. I could even have done it myself. Here you go. There you go. 10 weeks I asked for that, and I've still got nothing. It's almost as if I'm not treated with the respect I deserve as the most popular presenter on the entire radio station. But hey-ho, these are the crosses I bear on your behalf. So we're launching a new feature today. We haven't decided what it's called, but it's when I'll pick a story from the news and demonstrate how disingenuous, disgusting, dishonest it is in the way that it is being presented to you. So we had 3 yesterday. The absolute nonsense surrounding the... cessation of British sovereignty over the Chagos Islands, and the claim in much of the media that America was secretly furious about it, where it subsequently emerged that it was quite possibly at Joe Biden's behest that the negotiations started by the Conservatives were brought to a swift conclusion. There's even an argument that Labour had little choice but to carry on with the path that was set by the Conservatives, even as the Conservatives attacked them for doing it. A frankly extraordinary hypocrisy undertaken by both, you got it, right-wing politicians and their client journalists. What were the other 2 stories that we had on our list yesterday? There was Farage's ludicrous nonsense about an institutionally racist police service in this country being somehow operating in the favour of people with brown skin, and then the so-called Adam Smith Institute claiming that 1 in 5 of all millionaires in this country were set to leave the country without revealing anything about where they're who pays their wages, who funds that organisation. So there's 3 examples there of things that might fall under the auspices of the new feature. And the name for the new feature, poor old James in Sheffield, I think he pulled over to talk to me. He's been on hold for about an hour and a half. He's going to be on hold for another couple of minutes, because here is the full list, which I will then cull down to a short list and invite your votes after the next hiatus. The unpublished correction. I don't think that's going to win, is it? That was perhaps understandably submitted anonymously. Baljet, however, put his name to this. The truth and the whole truth. Yeah, okay. The missing link, that's quite good. That was sent in by someone who goes by the name We Are All Spartacus. Grift busters. I quite like that, but it's not a grift necessarily that we're busting. It's more bad journalism. So I know that you could argue bad journalism is a grift of sorts, but I think grift usually applies more to the peddlers of really extreme lies about things like, vaccines and the World Economic Forum, or politicians in the same sort of space. Truth Central, says Karen. I like that, quite literal. Jim goes for the Pinocchio Papers. I quite like the Pinocchio Papers. That might make the short list. The Truth Gets Its Trousers On is Roddy's. Outliers. You see the pun there? Liars. That's from Jacqueline. Mark goes for Read Between the Lies. That's quite clever. Remember, you're also needing to pick something that might lend itself to a sound effect that I'll probably never get anyway. So Read Between the Lies. Lies in Disguise. I like that. I like a rhyme. If I can't have an alliteration, I like a rhyme. Missed Information. That was our favourite yesterday and may still be our favourite today, but it's your votes that will decide it. Facts Are Us, says Rob. This is good. Michael goes for the Daily Polygraph. That's quite clever, because it sounds like a newspaper. It sounds like a journalistic outlet, but it's a lie detector test. Truth Extraction, that's from John. Truth Be Told, that's from Andrew. Guffbusters. Quite a lot of you came up with that, would you believe? And that is an indication, perhaps, of its potential popularity. Guffbusters with James O'Brien. James O'Brien's Guffbusters. Yeah, that's going to make the shortlist as well, isn't it? Would I Try to Lie to You? Would I Try to Lie to You? That's almost the song, isn't it? Was it Eurythmics? Would I Lie to You? Anyway, Would I Try to Lie to You? And finally, Mind the Gap. I don't get that. Oh, yes, I do. So those are the contenders. We'll put a shortlist together. We'll see if James in Sheffield is still alive or if he's died of boredom while waiting to talk to me. We'll catch up with Natasha Clark about what's likely to come up on PMQs today, and we'll probably have a little look at what is likely to happen in the Conservative leadership election as well, which is, of course, what we're supposed to be talking about. Who would be best for the country? Probably James Cleverly. Who would be best for business? Probably Kemi Badenoch, which almost certainly means the other fella will win. It's 11:46. 11:49 is the time. Better late than never, I suppose. I've got some guests coming in after PMQs who will address an issue that I took a decision some time ago not to talk about much, and in retrospect, I think that was a terrible, terrible mistake. I wonder whether or not you can work out what issue that was, or what individual that was that I elected not to talk about, because I didn't think that giving them even more oxygen and publicity would be helpful. But in retrospect, that was a terrible mistake. And we're also going to speak to somebody in Florida, where you may well have friends or family, who's had to evacuate their home. The figure I saw yesterday was 1.2 million people had been... no, actually, did I see that? No, I think that might have been in Lebanon, actually. I do apologise. Sometimes the stories get mixed up in my brain. But anyway, we'll be talking to someone in Florida who's had to evacuate their home because of an act of God as opposed to an act of the IDF. 11:50 is the time. James is in Sheffield. James, back to the Conservative leadership campaigns, plural. What would you like to say?
Yeah, okay, James. Basically, well, firstly, the last two callers you had on said everything I was thinking.
This is the worst phone-in ever. No offence, but no one is actually taking it seriously. Everyone is just telling me who they want to win for the purposes of not seeing the Conservatives return to electability.
Well, there's a good reason for that, though, James.
I know
this actually segues nicely into your feature you're looking at. I was going to go with the idiot tickler. I like the polygraph one.
Yes, I can't use idiot again. I've already got Idiot's Corner.
Yeah, fair point.
Can't have too many idiots.
No, but I mean, and actually, because the whole ideology of the Conservatives, I think, is the most dangerous thing about them, depending on who's leading it.
Yeah.
I don't like where it takes the country regardless. So in the same way they attack the left wing, Marxists, that kind of thing, I don't like the ideology of the Conservatives, full stop. So the more competent person they've got in charge, the more dangerous they are as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Would you say that under, I don't know, the kind of Philip Hammond, Dominic Grieve wing of the party?
Yeah, because and I'd say and even Rory Stewart, there's a lot of them I quite respect. But on the same hand, when you actually look really deep into the ideology of the Conservatives, the reducing what's the word I'm looking for? Rules and regulation, the free markets, the allowing people to roll forward.
But they don't all believe in that.
Do they not?
No, I don't think One Nation Conservatives think you give everything to big business in the hope that stuff trickles down. I mean, Michael Heseltine, for example, was famously interventionist. It was part of what the big argument was about with Leon Britton when one was at trade and one was at defence. So it's and Thatcher was a big fan of the free market, but she wasn't allergic to intervention. This lot are nuclear. I read something out yesterday from the bloke who founded the Adam Smith Institute, and he even said on the record, I think in his own autobiography, that we start off bonkers and end up being policy. So the shift in the party in recent years has been profound and obnoxious, but it could shift back to a place where they're not the things that you say.
I don't see how that can happen, though, I'll be honest. I think it's a lot more difficult to go backwards than it was for them to go forwards.
Yeah, that's often true. Then they're done for. They're done for.
Hopefully.
Well, yeah. So what's wrong with me then?
What do you mean?
Well, that's a good point. I should be more specific, shouldn't I, really, James? We could be here all day otherwise.
I was just going to say I've grown a stubble while waiting.
Exactly that. I need a new therapist. Why do I want a functional Conservative Party in place?
I think because of I'm the same age as you, roughly.
Yeah.
We've grown up with them, Conservatives and Labour being the two sides of the argument.
Yes.
I know the Lib Dems once upon a time and the Davies Steele and all that became, but
there or thereabouts.
We're just used to it. I don't actually think it's good for the country, and I think, and again, segueing back onto your feature, I think the way that our news is delivered to us, whether it's through right-wing papers owned by dodgy people,
yes,
the TV derives all their questioning and all their news agenda
from
these papers.
Yes.
And I think the amount of people I know to be decent people that are so easily influenced by this tribe.
Yeah.
Scares me to death.
And if the Conservative Party doesn't restore credibility, then don't the people who peddle the worst kind of lies, like Farage and his mates, don't they then don't they achieve more power? Don't they expand accordingly? Or do they reach a critical mass?
I genuinely don't think they're capable of putting on the decency mask to convince.
But nor's Donald Trump, and look at him. Look at his polling. If Biden was still in the race, Trump would almost certainly be about to win.
I actually believe that people in this country, I could be wrong on this, but I think they're a little bit more subdued and less likely to run away.
People swallowing the idea of two-tier policing yesterday or on Monday are the British cousins of the people who believe that Haitians in Springfield, Ohio are eating cats and dogs at the moment.
I hope not. I have to believe not.
I like that. It's the hope that gets you, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can deal with the despair. It's the hope that gets you every time. So everyone's going for Badenoch in the hopes that she presides over a cataclysmic catastrophe for the Conservatives. There's some alliteration for you.
Oh, Jenrick, either of them two.
Well, I don't know that Jenrick would be quite as cataclysmically catastrophic for the Conservatives as Kemi Badenoch. Speaking of Kemi Badenoch, she said last week, and I think I quote, "I'm a huge fan of Elon Musk."
Nobody's even bothering to try to kill Kamala because it's pointless. What do you achieve? Nothing.
No, it's totally
just find
right.
another puppet.
Exactly. That's
It's no point in killing.
It's deep and true, though.
Nobody's trying to kill Joe Biden. It would be pointless.
Totally.
Yeah, hilarious. Elon Musk there joking about people trying to kill Kamala Harris and Joe Biden with Tucker Carlson, a bloke who became too vile even for Rupert Murdoch's Fox News, but has enjoyed a second lease of life as a kind of Vladimir Putin fanboy. Sitting down yesterday or the day before with Elon Musk, who bought Twitter in order to ensure that there was free speech and no bias, and is now arguably the shrillest of Donald Trump cheerleaders. But Kemi Badenoch, the one who doesn't make any gaffes, she is a huge fan of Elon Musk. Someone put some fake footage. Did I tell you this at the time? Someone did a really bad fake edit of me supposedly joking about Donald Trump being shot. It was fake. I didn't. But quite a lot of the weirdos queued up to attack me and condemn me over a fake clip of someone joking about a presidential candidate being assassinated. So, goodness me, they're going to be very busy getting furious about a genuine clip of the richest man in the world, genuinely joking about both the current vice president, presidential candidate, and the current president being assassinated, aren't they? Unless, of course, they're massive lying far-right hypocrites. I guess you'd have to check their Twitter feeds to find out. And indeed, no, I'm not sure I can say that, but there's a clue in some of that to the answer to the question of what we're going to be talking about in the final part of the programme today that we should have talked about years ago. But that's enough. Thank you, James. Natasha Clark is here. PMQs first, or I mean, do we know? If you were putting money on who goes out today, who would you put your money on in the Conservative Party battle?
I think that it could be Kemi Badenoch.
No, but she would be best for business.
Best for your business, definitely.
Yes, and not best for your business?
No, I don't think so, because
we do different things, don't we
do.
For a living.
No, but not even that. I just think that Kemi Badenoch is, I think, sceptical about the media. I think let's put it lightly at that.
Okay.
And I don't think that,
She's sceptical about everything, isn't it? Who does she like?
That's a very good question.
No, it's the thing I always think when I see her on the telly. I say, what actually makes you happy? Who do you like?
Yeah, that's a good question.
We know what makes Robert Jenrick happy: painting over the murals of cartoons at processing centres for unaccompanied child asylum seekers.
He told Ian Daly he wouldn't do that again earlier this week.
It's a bit late now, Bob.
It's a bit late now, Bob. But yes, I think Kemi Badenoch would not be fantastically good for the media environment, because I don't think she likes speaking to journalists as much as potentially some of the other candidates. I'm not saying that is something that should make
a good thing or a bad thing.
Tory leader, but obviously we like, as journalists, bringing you what politicians actually say.
Yes.
And I think that she doesn't particularly enjoy doing that as much as some of the others do. In terms of your business, obviously, Honest Bob would, I'm sure, be very good for this programme.
I think Kemi Badenoch would be best for us. But both have broken the golden rule of political punditry and revealed that someone has managed to get under their skin quite successfully. Neither of them really should have done that, because it just encourages us.
I was so obsessed with you.
But you think that you sound like Mariah Carey. I bet no one's ever said that to you before. So we think probably Badenoch out today.
Look, the problem is if Badenoch does go out I think that at least earlier in the summer, there was quite a lot of polling suggesting that the members really like her. And we could be in with another situation where, like with the last leadership contest, where the members really liked Penny Mordaunt and she never got down to the final two. So that would really quite infuriate, I think, a lot of people, if that is true.
So it would have been great to give her a chance to stand and fight. What is likely to come up at PMQs today?
Well, I think it's widely expected that this could be a little bit of a trickier PMQs for Keir Starmer because he's had a bit of I think it's fair to say, he's not had a fantastic few weeks.
It's incredibly fair to say.
Winter fuel cuts, of course, still rumbling on. The freebies route. Rosie Duffield quitting the Labour Party.
Oh, I've forgotten about that.
Yeah, exactly. It was only around 2 weeks ago. Having to sack Sue Gray or resign, depending on who you decide to believe. There.
I think it was a sacking, wasn't it?
I mean, from all sources that I've spoken to, it seems like it is, or that she at least agreed to step down. I don't think she would have done so willingly, voluntarily. There has been infighting about the direction of the Labour Party, about the government, I should say. The Chagos Islands as well, I'm sure, will be getting a little bit of a backlash about that and what that means for the future of overseas territories. There's a lot of things that I think Rishi Sunak could go on. It's not been a fantastic few weeks for
does it
the
matter?
government. Yes, it does, because this is the direction of the government, and I think that they have let their comms in terms of their messaging slip. Remember, in the election campaign, Labour's 5 missions. Fixing the foundations. When was the last time you heard either of those two things from Keir Starmer? The government need to be talking about. No, sorry, as in those are two separate,
the 5 foundations.
Things. The five missions, or 6 missions, I think it was, of Keir Starmer's campaign. Incredibly effective messaging, telling us exactly what they were going to do in government. And I feel that messaging has slipped, and I feel that they're not talking enough about the good things that the government are doing at the moment and where the direction of travel is, what this government is going to look like.
I feel that too, but how much of it is down to the loud-hailers and how much of it is... Because they could shout their head off, and yet if it's not getting picked up and reported in the way that spectacles do...
Potentially.
There's a chicken and egg situation here.
It's a bit of both. It's not just one.
So he needs to find a new line of communication to the electorate, possibly, because he can't do what the previous 4 or 5 prime ministers has done and rely upon a sycophantic print media to put their messages on their front pages every day.
Potentially that, but also, the people that are going on the morning round don't seem to be having a coherent narrative of a string of messages. They keep getting asked about bloody spectacles and football tickets instead of about the policies that they're trying to introduce for the benefit of the nation. The skill of a good minister is to be able to steer that into what you're talking about. When was the last time we heard about your £22 billion black hole, fixing the foundations, growing the economy, all of these things that apparently are key to a Labour government? It felt like, to me, the messaging just dropped off a cliff as soon as they went into government, and they started not thinking about exactly how they were selling it because they felt, I think, like they didn't need to.
There's Gavin Williamson.
I've just also seen Richard Holden back in the House of Commons. They're all coming back out the woodwork.
That's extraordinary. I'd completely forgotten about him. He thought he was going to be leader at one point, didn't he?
They've got to cast their ballots in the Tory leadership race this afternoon, so they all need to be in Parliament today.
We are waiting for Rishi Sunak to get to his feet and begin PMQs. Keir Starmer is there. I thought Diane Abbott was sitting on the front bench then, but that's the bit right on the...
Yeah, that's no, that's not it.
I mean, it is a front bench, but it's not.
Yes,
it is not the front bench.
No.
So as soon as Rishi Sunak gets to his feet, then
and this is one of
we'll cross line.
We're in now the countdown into Rishi Sunak's last PMQs as well. So this might
when
be
is his last
4th.
PMQs?
So we expect a new leader to be in place by the 2nd of November. So just a couple of days before that will be his last one. So this could be his 4th, maybe 3rd.
I don't think it's that many. I think it's 3, isn't it? Well, we can work it out.
Got too long.
The date today is the 9th. So he'll be here on the 16th. He'll be on the 23rd, and he'll be there on the 30th.
There you go. And then that will hopefully be handing over the reins.
So 2 more after this
to either Kemi Badenoch, Robert Jenrick, or James Cleverly will be in post in just a couple of weeks' time.
Who do you think Keir Starmer would prefer?
So, interestingly, Lucy Powell...
Oh, no, we'll find out after this.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow the government will publish their anticipated changes to employment law. Given the weekend's events, when did the Prime Minister first become a convert to fire and rehire?
Very pleased and proud that tomorrow we will publish the bill which will be the biggest upgrade of workers' rights in a generation. And that'll do two things, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, it will give people basic dignity at work. And secondly, it will help grow our economy, something that the last government absolutely failed on for 14 long years.
The opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when he talks about security at work, once again, it's one rule for him and another rule for everyone else. Yeah. But I know that not everything or everyone has survived his first 100 days in government. So can he confirm that when he promised not to raise income tax, national insurance or VAT, that commitment applies to both employer and employee national insurance contributions?
Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, as he well knows, I'm not going to get drawn on decisions that will be set out. We made an absolute commitment in relation to not raising tax on working people. He, of course, was the expert's expert on raising taxes. And what did we get in return for it? We got a broken economy, broken public services, and a £22 billion black hole in the economy. We're here to stabilise the economy, and we will do so.
Leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think even Lord Ali is buying any of that nonsense. But I'm not asking, Mr. Speaker. I'm not asking about the budget. I'm not asking about the budget. I'm asking specifically. I'm asking specifically about the promise he made to the British people. So let me ask him again, just to clarify his own promise. Does his commitment not to raise national insurance apply to both employee and employer national insurance contributions?
We set out our promises in our manifesto. We returned with a huge majority to change the country for the better. And I stick to my promises in the manifesto. But I notice it's question 3, and he hasn't yet welcomed the investment into this country. We've had in recent months £8 billion from Amazon for jobs across the country, £10 billion from Blackstone's jobs across the North East, £22 billion on carbon capture jobs in the North East and the North West, 500 million, Mr. Speaker, for UK buses in Northern Ireland. While we're investing in our economy, what are they doing? They're arguing about whether to scrap maternity pay.
Leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to welcome investments that this government negotiated, but when it comes to his answer on tax, Mr. Speaker, businesses across the country would have found his answer just about as reassuring as Sue Gray did when he promised to protect her job, Mr. Speaker. So let me turn. It's no wonder confidence is plummeting on his watch, which he didn't mention. But turning to another commitment, before the election, his Chancellor said changing the debt target in the fiscal rules would be tantamount to fiddling the figures. Does he still agree with the Chancellor?
Prime Minister.
This is literally the man who was in charge of the economy. 14 years they crashed the economy. And what did they leave? A £22 billion black hole in the economy. Unlike them, we won't walk past it, we will fix it, and it's only because we're stabilising the economy that we are getting the investment into this country. But I still notice he hasn't really talked about that investment. We're powering ahead with clean British energy. We're changing the rules to build 1.5 million homes and returning railways to public ownership. And they've got nothing to say about any of this.
Mr. Speaker, on debt, we left them the second lowest debt in the G7, Mr. Speaker. And as the Institute of Fiscal Studies have said...
Order. I will hear the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, as the Institute of Fiscal Studies have said, it's hard to escape the suspicion that the government is attracted to this change because it would allow for significantly more borrowing. Now, his Chancellor previously said that this change, and I quote her words, would be fiddling the figures. So it is a simple question. Does he still agree with the Chancellor?
Prime Minister.
I see it's back to his old script. They've never had it so good. That didn't work so well at the election plan. Might be time to change that. I'm not going to get drawn on issues for the budget, just as he wouldn't when he was standing at this dispatch box. But meanwhile, we're investing, we're building the NHS fit for the future back on its feet, better opportunities for young people and protections at work. After 14 years of Tory failure, we're giving the country its future back. And that's the difference that Labour delivers.
Mr. Speaker, it is clear he's opened the door to raising employer national insurance contributions, including on pensions, and fiddling the figures that he can borrow more. And he talks about what he's achieved. Well, economic confidence is plummeting, growth is now stalling, and the UK's borrowing costs are rising on his watch, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, can I close on another important topic? Because yesterday's intervention from the head of MI5 will have been sobering for the whole House, and not least his warning that Britain faces the most complex and interconnected threats in our country's history. Now, I know the Prime Minister will agree with me that we all owe our security services a debt of gratitude for what they do to keep us safe. But can the Prime Minister confirm that the forthcoming terrorism bill will give our security services the powers they need to tackle evolving threats? And I can assure him of our constructive support on these vital questions of national security in the same spirit that he provided that support to me.
Prime Minister.
Well, I can confirm that we will give the security forces and services the powers that they need, and I hope that is a shared objective across the House. They do an incredibly important job for us. But he talks about the economy. It's a real shame the party opposite can't simply... Well, he did at the beginning of his question a moment ago. Listen on. It's a shame they can't celebrate Britain's success under this government. Of course we've got to take tough decisions. But when investment is pouring in, as it has been in recent weeks, when the NHS strikes are coming to an end, when houses are getting built, we're delivering the biggest upgrade of workers' rights in a generation. It's time for them to accept that we're fixing the foundations. So whilst they fight amongst themselves in the comfort zone of unfunded promises, threatening to scrap the minimum wage, we're going to get on with the job of clearing up the mess that they made and fighting a better country that people are crying out for.
Adam Jogi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, cancer is hard on the patient and it's hard on their families, as my family knows all too well this year. Can I ask the Prime Minister to commit to doing all he can to improve research, early diagnosis and patient care for those with cancer? And will he join me in thanking the NHS staff who've looked after my dad in recent weeks and thousands of cancer patients like him in Newcastle-on-Lyme and up and down our United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
I was sorry to hear about my honourable friend's father, and I think we would all pass him our best wishes. Cancer is another example of the dreadful state the last government left the NHS in. The Darcy report published just a few weeks ago showed that some cancer standards have not been met since 2015, and no progress was made in diagnosing cancer at stage 1 and stage 2 between 2013 and 2021. So I'm really pleased that we've just announced £6.4 million research network developing new AI software to identify cancer early. We will get the NHS catching cancer on time, diagnosing it earlier and treating it faster.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Across this House, we all agree that we need to get our economy growing strongly again so we can improve people's lives and raise the money for our public services. Liberal Democrats believe that one of the best ways of doing that is to improve our relationship with our European neighbours on things like trade, and I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister has made this a priority in his first few weeks. But what I just don't understand is that he's ruled out negotiating a youth mobility scheme with our European partners. This could be so good for young people, for businesses, and for re-establishing that relationship. So will he reconsider this?
Prime Minister.
Well, he's right. We do need a better deal with the EU than the bad deal we got under the last government. And that's why I was very pleased to meet the President of the Commission last week to talk about how we can improve on the deal. In our manifesto, we had clear red lines about the single market, customs union, freedom of movement, and we will negotiate with those red lines in place.
David.
Well, I'm disappointed about the youth mobility scheme. Maybe we can come back to that. But he's right to say one of the many problems for our economy coming from the dreadful Brexit deal was the red tape that's been put on businesses. Now, there are many examples of that, Mr. Speaker, but a new example came to me earlier this week, and it affects fishermen in the Falklands, who are otherwise having to pay huge amounts in tariffs to be able to sell their produce into the European market, or sail under a Spanish flag. So when the Prime Minister renegotiates the trade deal, can you remember the overseas territories? And ensure that British citizens fishing off the Falklands can sail proudly under the Union Jack?
Prime Minister.
My uncle nearly lost his life when his ship was torpedoed defending the Falklands. They are British, and they will remain British. And sovereignty in Gibraltar is equally not to be negotiated. Of course, we will do everything we can to make it easier for all businesses to trade more freely so that we can grow our economy. I'm very, very clear about the Falklands. It's personal to me.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Conservative-led Derbyshire County Council are proposing to cut adult day
and it's
centres
12:15, bringing it bang on time. Well, we shall pick over the bones of that with Natasha Clark in a few moments, but I think it's fair to say that we'll pick over the bones of that in a few moments with Natasha Clark. I've got a short list now of names for the new feature. I've narrowed it down to 5 or 6. I'll share that with you shortly, but first, Natasha Clark is here. My friend Keith, not that one, another one, who is much more au fait with youth speak than I am, has messaged me to express his surprise that Sunak has bars in opposition, which I think means he was funny.
He was.
And adds, I laughed out loud a couple of times. The line about even Lord Ali wouldn't buy that was
he
a
did
very,
laugh.
very
Starmer
good line.
laughed at it.
Yeah, it was a good joke.
It was good. But look, I laugh at all politicians' jokes, to be honest, on both sides of the spectrum because, well, I guess I'm a loser. But look, I thought, that was a very Sunak sort of PMQs, wasn't it? A bit about the economy, trying to defend what he thinks is a good record on it, saying that Keir Starmer's going to trash it. A little bit of sort of unity at the end, talking about the security services and that warning that we had
took
from
the wind
MI5.
out of Starmer's sails. Sorry for talking over you, but a lot of people have made the point that you prepare that final answer. That's supposed to be the bit that makes the news at 10.
It is.
And by
It's usually gone the
changing
other way
mood
around.
and changing tone completely, Sunak did slightly wrong foot Starmer there, I think.
I'm not sure.
No?
I would agree with
Okay.
that. I think it's probably not the tone I would have done it. I would have gone in with that sort of. I'm going to start by talking about the security services and the MI5 briefing, and we can come together, and then we can have our jarring and sparring afterwards. That's kind of how I would have done it had I been running Prime Minister's Questions, which I do not do.
Yet.
But Keir seemed to have had his Weetabix. I think we can agree on that. He clearly came in with a bit more fight in him than I've seen in previous weeks. And he kind of has to, because, like I say, I think he has been on the back foot in the last couple of weeks. I think he has suffered from a little bit of a lack of direction, headlines, whether you agree with them or not, and the direction of travel hasn't been fantastic. And I think he's clearly coming out fighting today. And obviously, as we go towards this 100 days mark, which we're all going to be looking to at the end of the week, where we naturally will look back on Keir Starmer's first 100 days and what it has meant, whether people are happy with it, whether his MPs are happy, what the public think about that. I think, he's obviously trying to talk about some of the good things that this government have actually done in the past 100 days since he's been in. And I think he needs to be ramming that message down our throats a little bit stronger, a little bit more forcefully. We heard him tick off a few of the buzzwords today: 22 billion black hole, fixing the foundations, some of the things that he said in the campaign that I feel have been missing from government.
Yes.
He's started to talk about them a little bit more today. I wish he'd been doing that for the past sort of 100 days, to be honest with you.
You've just made me realise something. The fact that there haven't been any PMQs means that we haven't actually heard as much from him as certainly anoraks like you and I would have done in normal times. So in fact, he probably would have been hitting the marks that you described earlier if he'd been on his feet with the cameras and the attention focused upon him more every week for the last 4.
Arguably, he can come on and say whatever he wants whenever he wants to the cameras. Obviously, we media will take him any time. Yes. But obviously, he has been wanting to get on with the job of governing and not wanting to be in front of the cameras selling it. And I think that is a little bit of a more deliberate strategy, because you're in government now. You don't need to be selling yourself to the British public as much after you've just won a landslide election. Do you? Or do you?
Yeah, good point. I think the Falklands answer was textbook.
Yeah.
I mean, perfect, in fact. It brooks no criticism, and it also makes us aware of familial contributions to the Falklands War that I was previously ignorant of.
Me too. It's so strong. I don't know if Keir Starmer's talked about that before, mentioning that his family were involved in a boat that was torpedoed defending the Falklands. They are British and will remain so. That is the strongest signal we've had from Keir Starmer, that there will be absolutely no changes to the sovereignty of the Falkland Islands. And I think he has got a bit of a backlash over the Chagos Islands. I think it's fair to say, from people within his own party, within the Conservative Party, even though James Cleverly, formerly the Foreign Secretary, on the back foot because these were negotiations that started under the previous administration. Keir Starmer has clearly taken that decision and decided that is something that he's willing to do despite the backlash to it. Surprised that Rishi Sunak didn't actually... I don't think he mentioned that, did he?
Well, he's a lawyer, Keir Starmer, and it would have left the UK, as you know, in breach of international law in the fairly near future. The only chance of getting out of it would have been a vote for a veto from our European Union fellow members. But given that they're not fellow members anymore, he wouldn't have been able to count on that. So Sunak may have chosen not to open up that particular line of inquiry because it is largely media confection, albeit effective.
Oh, partly, but equally the top line figure is the same, right? It's still the story is still what it is that they are signing over that sovereignty, whether rightly or wrongly. But yes, you're right. Keir Starmer, obviously stickler for international law, a lawyer, would of course have something to say about that. And potentially Rishi Sunak didn't want to open up a row within the ongoing Tory leadership. Potentially, if James Cleverly does win, it's going to be awkward questions for him about those direction of travel.
If they choose to make political capital out of it.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly, because Keir
that.
Starmer would have had a very good comeback. Well, actually, we were just continuing what the last guys started.
And then Ed Davey, possibly for the first time, highlighting what his role can be in this Parliament. And it's a role that can't be fulfilled by any Conservative for the foreseeable future. And that is to keep the Brexit fires burning, essentially, and to look for a little bit more detail from Keir Starmer, as opposed to the sort of warmish words without much substance on what these improvements to Johnson's so-called oven-ready deal might look like.
Yes, the youth mobility scheme has been talked about quite a lot in the press in the last few weeks and months. There have been lots of reports saying that Keir Starmer would be open to such a youth mobility scheme. He has not said that in public. This is all people behind the scenes. And look, we haven't even started those negotiations with the EU yet. Obviously, the Commission and Ursula von der Leyen only been back in post for a matter of weeks. Keir Starmer has obviously been trying to lay that groundwork with a series of European discussions with all of his counterparts. He's been out and about to Brussels. He's been meeting them at Blenheim Palace, but it hasn't really kicked off in earnest yet, and it won't, I'm told, until the end of the year. So we are still a bit light on the detail. Ed Davey doing his best there to try and press Keir Starmer on what that might mean, whether it will look at a youth mobility scheme. Keir Starmer only replying saying we need a better deal. We've got our red lines and we will negotiate with those red lines in place. I think personally he would be open to some form of deal like that.
What we forget, though, partly because it's dropped off the radar a bit and partly because of the misinformation and manipulation that surrounded all Brexit discussions when Johnson was in charge, is that it is a genuine negotiation. So Starmer isn't going to say we want that publicly here before sitting down in a locked room, metaphorically locked room, and bargaining. So, the European Union will want some sort of freedom of movement for their young people, and there are more of their young people than there are of ours. So in terms of gravity or statistics, it would be a win for both sides, but a bigger win for the bigger side.
Exactly.
So he needs to keep his sort of cards closer to his chest than Ed Davey would like.
Yes, and, than we all would like. We'd all like to be discussing the ins and outs of those deals, but, we did see it splayed out for 3 years during the Brexit negotiations over all of our media. So is that a good thing for a negotiation tactic? Potentially not. But yes, I think, like I say, I think Keir Starmer and his government would be warm to some sort of agreement on that, not least because it would keep a certain side of his party, who might be a thorn in his side on other issues, a little bit happier. Equally, does he want to reopen Brexit wounds and Brexit wars again? He's got to be very, very careful not to be seen to be reopening too many of those lines, I think, because it could be a dangerous Pandora's box that could easily get sort of lost with him.
There's no gain in it at the moment, not with the size of this majority and the length of this Parliament. To relitigate Brexit more explicitly at the moment would be putting one a hiding to nothing, really. No,
but who on the backbenches is really calling out for Keir Starmer to be reopening that that Brexit negotiation. There are some MPs privately who would like to see him do so, but they won't call out for so publicly. And if you look at the direction of travel for Keir Starmer's government, the fact that he went to Italy to meet with Giorgia Meloni to talk about migration shows more about the direction of European travel and the people that he's trying to keep on side, the messaging that he's trying to keep on side.
Much to the annoyance of many traditional Labour supporters.
And you had a couple of MPs come out to say that
it's
Keir
just a fascist
Starmer
party. It's a party that has its roots in fascism.
But the fact that Keir Starmer made a big deal about that visit shows everything you need to know about what kind of people that Keir Starmer is trying to keep on side, rather than those potential left-wing MPs in his own party. He's not interested in entertaining that at the moment. We've seen that with winter fuel. We've seen that with the two-child benefit limit. But, this Parliament's going to be a long one. He's got 5 years and they could prove some real trouble on the backbenches. I think he might need to keep Brexit talks as a bit of a card in the back pocket, just in case he needs it later on.
Who might be the focal points of potential trouble on the backbenches? Maybe names that we haven't heard before.
In terms of Brexit?
No, in terms of anything, really.
Look, I think that there's so many different groups of MPs now, because of the majority being so large, that any one of those groups, if they decided to club together to hurt the Prime Minister, to vote against him in a specific way, he will have to be very, very alive to that. And not, like I say, not because there's any chance that he might lose a huge vote in the House of Commons, but like I say, more because of what will be damaging headlines about another potential rebellion on his cards. And rightly or wrongly, whether you think that's a big deal or not, we will talk about it if it does happen.
And he will probably have a suboptimal by-election at some point in the next couple of years.
Sure, it will happen.
Depending on where the political pendulum is at that point. It kind of goes with the territory of a long tenure.
It does. And we haven't talked about Rosie Duffield and whether something like that and that resignation will hurt Keir Starmer or not.
I don't.
Arguably not, because
who's going to get worked up about that? It is. Someone who was apparently perfectly comfortable with Jeremy Corbyn's leadership for goodness knows how many years gets elected on the back of Keir Starmer's leadership and then walks the plank a few weeks later.
It's very weird and very suspicious. The timing of this. I'm surprised if she was going to do it, she should have done it before the party conference. That would have been slightly more embarrassing.
And she won't be calling a by-election. She will remain in Parliament, as many politicians have done in the past, including, I forget what they were called, when Chuka and others set up their own
Change
party,
UK.
didn't they? Change
Remember
UK.
them? Whatever happened to those guys?
So you can't demand a by-election from the politicians you approve of, while staying quiet about the absence of by-elections from the politicians that you don't approve of, or indeed vice versa. Couple of texts. Starmer sounded much better, says Beatrice. Glad to hear that he's listened to some of the constructive criticism on comms and was championing Labour's early wins, painting a more hopeful picture about future opportunities for Britain under Labour, including investment, workers' rights and NHS funding for research. I do sometimes wonder whether my inbox gets invaded by people texting directly from either central offices, either Labour HQ or Conservative.
That sounds very...
Simon from Woking is a regular correspondent. Good afternoon, James. For me, that was a clear win for Keir Starmer. He rode above the side swipes, some of them extremely childish. He even rode above the attempt by Sunak at the end to slow the pace. Tom says, who'd have thought that Rishi Sunak would be a better comedian than he was a Prime Minister? And John says, I think Starmer made a bad tactical mistake by steering Sunak's final question away from the national security threat to what was probably his prepared response on economic issues. It sounded cheap and dismissive. Javier, by contrast, who describes himself as texting from the bath, which is, I believe the kids say, TMI, the clunkiest of gear changes there from Sunak for his final question. No surprise, I guess, given that he has tried to put full star into an electric car.
Yeah, it didn't work, that one, I don't think.
You don't, do you? I got 3 or 4 people who think it did. But
Starmer didn't really have a response for that, which he should have potentially done. It was a pretty major intervention from the MI5 chief yesterday, and I don't think Keir was ready to talk about that one. He probably didn't really have that one in the back pocket.
Yeah, in the locker. Natasha Clock, until next week. And then there's no hiatus because the conferences are over now. So we go Sunak, who?
I believe so. There will obviously be at some point...
Sunak, who?
Oh, sorry, as in who's it going to be?
Yeah, well, there's 2 left. Sunak, someone.
Yeah, I'll double check that and get back to you.
But you can't double check who it's going to be.
Well, double check when the recess dates are to check whether there's not any more hiatuses before we go into the budget, which I believe there's not.
Thank you very much, Natasha Clark. Up next, quite a few of you rather gratifyingly. I do like the evidence that you pay attention to this nonsense. You should do, frankly, but I fully appreciate if you don't, won't, or can't. When I suggested to you that it was about a year ago, and to be fair, Sheila Fogarty got this right and I got this wrong, when I elected not to talk about someone stroke something 3 years ago, actually, because I felt that it would make the problem worse by giving it oxygen. It was a huge miscalculation on my part. Not that I think we can make much difference in the great scheme of things, whatever people like Honest Bob Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch and Nadine Dorries may believe. I think normal people living in the normal world recognise the limits of a little radio phone-in. But we definitely should have turned our attention to Andrew Tate and his kind of weaponised misogyny long before we knew about the allegations of people trafficking and sundry sex crimes, or indeed long before he became Nigel Farage's trusted news source for events unfolding in Britain, as he, Andrew Tate, faces various charges in Romania. I think that was a mistake. Happily, I've got two guests after the news who have spent 4 years inside what they call Andrew Tate's manosphere. You may have seen a documentary that they made, and there was so much material that they unearthed while researching the documentary that they've now written a book as well, Clown World. It's called 4 Years Inside Andrew Tate's Manosphere, and we'll hear from Jamie Tarsin and Matt Shea after the very latest headlines with Amelia Cox. 12:35, this from Beatrice. I just sent this to my mum, she writes. James O'Brien just read out my text, and she includes it, just read out the above text, and he and Natasha, LBC's political editor, suggested that I could be a Labour plant. I am slightly insulted. I don't know if I need now to offer up words of succour to Beatrice's mum, but I just said you might be. I didn't say that you definitely were. Turn our attention next to something that I obviously should have been a lot more up on. I had godsons who were telling me about Andrew Tate and how amazing he was. And because I love my godson so much, I didn't really pay much attention to what it was that they were exposing themselves to. But Jamie Tarsin and Matt Shea did. This is a kind of journalistic pay dirt, isn't it, guys? Because you've spent 4 years. You were researching documentary films, The Dangerous Rise of Andrew Tate and The Man Who Groomed the World, which came out last year. But you were in place before he became... Jamie, anywhere near as big as he is today. So what piqued your interest? How did you know, as it were, that this was territory that needed to be explored?
Yeah, I came into it through an interesting route whereby a friend of mine's sister, a friend of mine's friend's younger brother had basically become obsessed with Andrew Tate, and she sent me a link of his Instagram, and you could see all of these pictures he was making, basically completely replicating Andrew Tate's Instagram images with the same captions underneath. But the most grabbing thing was that he was now paying thousands of pounds a year to join something called the War Room, which is this sort of very top-end course that Andrew Tate was selling that ostensibly got you access to Andrew Tate and access to an elite network of men that he had put together, and they would teach you how to become an alpha male, rich and successful just like him. And I'd been looking at the manosphere for years. There were loads of sort of fringe figures in it, but this was the first time I'd seen young men paying a fee to join a cult and basically go to real-world meetups with this very, very viral misogynist. At the time, he had about 50,000 Instagram followers, and in the next 3 years, that massively catapulted him to fame, and he became the most viewed man in TikTok and the most Googled man in the world for a brief period.
How old was your friend's son?
He was 21.
He was 21. Because for the younger lads, it was all about the cars and the kind of glamour and the money, but the misogyny kicks in quite quickly after you've been hooked. How do you get hooked? I'll ask you, Matt. I'll do my best to share out the questions. How does a young person get hooked back in the day?
So if you think of Andrew Tate followers as a kind of pyramid, say your son is watching Andrew Tate's content on TikTok or on Twitter or Instagram. They think some of the stuff he says is funny. He makes some jokes.
Yes. And they like fast cars.
Exactly. They're just on the bottom rung of a pyramid. The next step up is his courses, the Hustlers University, now called The Real World. It's a monthly fee. You learn in these courses supposedly how to become rich like Andrew Tate. They're actually an affiliate marketing scheme. But above that, you have the War Room at the top of the pyramid. And what we uncovered in this book is that the War Room is essentially an international network of men who are learning from Andrew Tate and his so-called generals how to groom women into sex work, to, in their own words, convert women into slaves. So the beginning may be some funny videos on TikTok, but the end result is essentially, I mean, a gender apartheid that's worse than the Taliban.
Wow. And the misogyny is an intrinsic part of that journey, because you couldn't become somebody who wanted to do that to women unless you'd been persuaded into a position of essentially hating women or commoditizing women.
Exactly. And I think that the way that Andrew Tate does that is he works on men's insecurity and jealousy, young men's jealousy of other men like him, who are these supposed alpha males who, at least through Instagram and TikTok, appear to have access to loads of beautiful women. He pries open that sexual jealousy and fills it with his own marketing.
Why did he agree to spend so much time with you two?
I think when we first reached out to him, he was still on that trajectory to trying to become famous. And as you can maybe tell, if you've ever watched any of his videos, he's an extremely confident man. Lots of people have called him a narcissist. Some have called him a psychopath. And he did really, when I first met him, have this air of, I know you're a journalist and I know you're not going to like me, but try your best, come at me. And he was so
his exact
desperate.
words were, "You can make a hit piece, I don't care."
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah. And
there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Exactly, yeah. But I think what he didn't necessarily take into account was that we wouldn't just be going to Romania with him, spending time with him, embedding Matt in his war room and having him meet the other men and go through various challenges. We also, quite early on, sort of towards the end of 2019, became very suspicious of his webcam business, and basically, we suspected he was grooming women. He was trafficking women into the sex trade. So alongside our time spending time with him in Romania and embedding in the war room, we also began to investigate those allegations, and we did unearth multiple women in the UK who had alleged that Andrew Tate had raped them, groomed them into sex work, and they actually reported those allegations to the British police. Nothing came of it. All allegations which he denies, but I think it was something he overlooked when he gave us access.
And in a way, that there's a sort of two parallel universes here, Matt, because you are there collating extraordinary content, but at the same time, you must have been profoundly alarmed by the trajectory that you found Andrew Tate on as your investigations continued, because he was becoming, one of the most famous people on the internet. Infamous or famous, depending on your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's this bizarre moment where we are at this War Room Summit event where men had paid thousands of dollars to come to Romania to be tested by Andrew Tate. I participated in this. We were given the option to, quote, fight a professional MMA fighter. I say quote because basically it means getting the crap kicked out of you by a professional MMA fighter. For Andrew Tate's approval or not. And it was this kind of test of masculinity. While I was doing that, Andrew Tate was becoming the most famous person on social media. And social media companies were beginning to grapple with how to potentially ban him. Teachers and politicians were beginning to sound the alarm. And there was this moment where, every journalist in the world was reaching out to the Tate brothers for comment. And I was right there with them. And I wanted to ask them about this stuff, but I couldn't because I was about to enter a boxing ring to get beaten up on his behalf.
It's a living.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Elon Musk put him back on Twitter. But this coincides with the worst allegations emerging, and you indeed speak to some of the women who were allegedly raped and beaten by both brothers. He has a brother called Tristan. Were you surprised by the criminal investigation, or did it have an air of inevitability to it, Jamie?
To me, it had an air of inevitability. Andrew Tate makes a number of courses, The Real World and The War Room, probably his two most famous. But the first course that he put out, and the one which I watched in the end of 2019 when I was still speaking to Andrew Tate, was his PhD course. Stands for Pimping Hose Degree, which gives you a bit of an idea of the sort of content.
Yes.
But if you watch it, it's essentially a play-by-play guide for how to find vulnerable women, groom them by making them subservient to you, but also separating them from their friends and family network, and then eventually turning them into sex workers who give you all the money. That's a pretty big red flag. And to be honest, I was more shocked by the other journalists who started to give him interviews in 2021 and 2022 who didn't ask him those questions and didn't just quote his own words back to him from those courses. He says in that course, "What I'm teaching you is very similar to what street pimps use." That's a direct quote. And no one was asking him about it. So when we sat down with him in Romania, we put the allegation to him that he was using the lover boy method to groom women. And when the arrest came, it did feel relatively inevitable to me.
Did you ever really anger him?
Yes.
Yeah, well, when we started asking him questions about the grooming, he was furious. He felt betrayed. He was like, we invited you in here, we taught you about masculinity, and here you are asking us questions about grooming.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, welcome to the real world.
Yeah.
And what did you expect?
Yeah.
You've spent the last 5-6 years bragging about running a webcam company where everyone started as your girlfriend. If you invite journalists into your compound, they may well ask you about it.
It was summer 2022, I think, when you had your last conversation with him. In some ways, things have escalated ever further since then, haven't they? How's it going to end?
Well, we can't comment on how the trial
of course
will end, but there are so many allegations against Andrew Tate for sex trafficking, running an organized criminal group to traffic women. Some of these women, some of the women involved in these allegations against the Tate brothers are underage. There's a number of women in the UK who are pursuing a civil case against him for sexual assault. And the police have been gathering a ton of evidence.
We should probably mention that this is a man who Nigel Farage recently cited as a trusted news source in the context of criticising or quotes, asking questions, end quotes, about the UK police. Well, I mean, given that you are two of the world's leading experts on Andrew Tate and his suitability to be a trusted news source for a sitting member of the UK Parliament, what did either of you, or indeed both of you, make of that?
I mean, it's absolutely insane that someone would openly admit to using Andrew Tate as a source of information. But what that touches on is this ideology isn't just dangerous because it spreads misogyny. It also spreads distrust in democratic institutions, the media, and all the traditional sources of knowledge. That's, in as small a way as teaching your son not to trust his teachers or his parents, but in a larger way, teaching everyone who follows Andrew Tate not to trust the media. So Nigel Farage saw a post by Andrew Tate on X, Twitter. Elon Musk had reinstated Andrew Tate even after all these allegations came out, which was full of disinformation about the person who started who committed
we need
the stabbing.
to be slightly careful on legal matters there, but it was plainly all false. And when asked how he could have got himself involved in something like that, he said, "Well, Andrew Tate told me."
Yeah,
I think what people don't necessarily understand is how embraced Andrew Tate was by some right-wing politicians in the UK and the US long before he became famous. So Andrew Tate first met Nigel Farage back in 2019 at the CPAC conference. That's right, yeah. And he has close allies in the US as well who also fall in that same circle that Nigel Farage runs in.
What do they have in common, Jamie? What's the Venn diagram here, do you think?
I think,
apart from the kind of grooming process of a population versus an individual.
I think when you look at, my opinion is when you look at Nigel Farage's work with the Reform Party recently, he's really made a conscious effort to try and appeal to young men who perhaps feel disenfranchised. They're a very, very valuable group to politicians because they don't typically vote. And Andrew Tate did become a figurehead for those young men. And I feel like a lot of politicians embraced him just as a way to sort of win over that audience.
Young men are moving towards the right in
Yes,
the UK
they are.
and the US.
Yeah. And he would be part of one of the Pied Pipers of that process. What would you say then to someone worried today about their brother still being in the thrall to Andrew Tate or still being attracted to the online content of Andrew Tate?
I mean, I think that you have to get people who follow Andrew Tate to empathize with and believe in the stories of the women who allege that he abused them, that he raped them, or that he trafficked them, allegations which he and his brother both deny. Once you hear these women's accounts, once you hear what they say they've been through, it's very difficult to still follow Andrew Tate and trust him. Everyone who's not a psychopath can empathize with their stories.
What happened to your friend's brother?
He's still there.
Is he really?
Still a member.
Have you tried to, I mean, perhaps the phrase is actually an intervention. That's what you use in the context of cults, isn't it?
I think, to be honest, he's been in it for so long that I think his family have found it extremely difficult to get through to him. Wow. And it's kind of created a separation. And unfortunately, that's something we actually saw when we were in the war room. We got access to a bunch of Telegram messages between different war room members, which we go through in the book. And you'll see young men coming forward saying, my dad really disagrees with this. He keeps telling me to stop watching Andrew Tate, or my mum or my sister. And Andrew Tate's generals reply, well, you should stop talking to your dad. Cut those people out of your life. And I think that's where you saw the real cult-like tactics. And I know we talk a lot about echo chambers at the moment, but these men are put in an echo chamber where they're just surrounded by other young, angry, misogynistic men. And then they're added to closed Telegram groups where they can be in constant communication with each other all the time. So they're over and over again just reinforcing the beliefs that they already hold. So it can become really difficult for family members to break through.
Like classic coercive control, isn't it, really? I mean, and yet we often think about that as being directed at women as opposed to being directed at men who dream of directing it at women because of the successful indoctrination of the cult. And presumably Clown World would be of use to the mums and the dads and the brothers and the sisters that you're talking about.
I think so, yeah. I think we really hope that the book not only helps you understand the full ideology and the extent of how far it goes in its denigration of women, but also the real life impacts. You know, we speak to women who allege that they were abused and groomed. We speak to young men who feel that they've had their lives torn apart by spending time in this circle, because some people do break out of it. And I think a lot of people see the surface level headlines with Andrew Tate, but they don't really understand quite how nefarious the ideology is.
Yes, indeed. And perhaps some Reform Party supporters would do well to familiarise themselves with what their leader is attracted to as well. Men are superior, we're better, we're stronger, we're smarter than women. That's just the way it is. You report a teacher in Edinburgh describing a boy saying that who was 8 years old, which seems a sort of powerful point at which to end the examination, this brief examination of just how far his malign influence has reached into our society.
Yeah.
Jamie Tarsin Matchey, thank you. Clown World, 4 years inside Andrew Tate's manosphere, is available now in all good bookshops, and quite probably mediocre ones as well. It's 12:50. It's 12:53. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Elle says, I really, really need this book. Please tell me the name again. I only just caught the end of it, but I absolutely need this book. It is called Clown World, 4 years inside Andrew Tate's manosphere. If you're watching on YouTube, my apologies for neglecting you recently. Hey, guys, don't forget to press the button. There it is. There is the book. You can see it. To Florida next, to Tampa, in fact, or to the Tampa area to begin with, but Orlando latterly, because Carrie Word, who is about to join me, has evacuated from Tampa to the latter, to Orlando, as her neighbourhood faced the force of Hurricane Helene. And Carrie joins me on the line now. My very, very best wishes to you and yours, Carrie. It must be an incredibly difficult time for you, albeit that you appear to be in safety now. So apologies if this is a silly question to start with, but at what point do you make the decision to up sticks and run, as it were?
Well, I would say probably Saturday. We had been talking about, if it was really coming to Tampa or just north of Tampa, since we're on the water, we wanted to leave and get out. And many times things don't come to Tampa, even though they're expected to. So people typically don't take it seriously. I actually am kind of thankful in a way that Helene has came prior to kind of warn people in a way. I don't know. It sounds really bad, but I think so many more people are taking this more seriously than they probably would have prior. I know there's still some people that are staying, but I think the majority of people that I've talked to have taken it seriously and are leaving. So.
Can you give us an indication of what is happening elsewhere in Florida? I mean, what level of impact and damage this hurricane has inflicted upon neighborhoods that would previously have felt quite safe?
So are you referring to Helene that just went through and damaged a bunch of homes, or are you referring to Milton that hasn't hit yet?
Well, Helene in the first instance, with the caveat, of course, that Milton is expected to be much worse.
So Helene, I actually have friends staying with me right now here that evacuated. They live in Hudson, and they were flooded last year with Idalia, flooded this year with Helene. Our neighborhood in Apollo Beach, so they're north of Tampa. We are south of Tampa. And our neighborhood, we had about 80% of the homes on our road flood, and there is debris everywhere. I mean, it's impossible for the city to pick up everything that they need to pick up at all the different places, because it just looks like a junkyard in so many neighborhoods that are along the water.
How long does it take to get back to normal in previous years?
This is nothing like we've experienced in normal years.
Right.
So Ian last year, Fort Myers, they would probably be able to answer a bit more like, or Ian and some of the other ones more catastrophic.
It's amazing how, just for my British listeners, which is most of them, it's amazing how you're on first name terms with these hurricanes. It's because it's such a sort of part of your existence in Florida now, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So.
So, I mean, the big question is, what do we know about what Milton is likely to do, and what sort of sources do you rely on? There's always a chance with the weather that the unexpected can happen, but what is currently the expected to the best of your knowledge?
So I rely on local weather, but I also rely a lot on Dennis Phillips and or Dean Phillips and then Mike's weather page. I really like to follow them to kind of get their takes on things. What is expected from what I've learned, I've been able to learn a lot by following them, is that wherever it hits on the West Coast, wherever it hits, everywhere just south where it makes landfall is going to have extreme storm surge. Tampa Bay was calling for 10 to 15 feet. I think now most recently it was down to 8 to 12 feet.
Wow.
But I think it just depends on where it hits. So catastrophic, where it hits in south, catastrophic flooding. And then obviously if it's a cat 5 right now, it's they think be a cat 4 when it hits, maybe cat 3. And so whenever that does make landfall, the wind, I mean, we have the wind and the water. If you're on the south side, the water is the issue. Or if anywhere around it is going to have wind issues. And I saw a diagram that showed, like if you're in a cat 4 or 5, it pretty much strips your house to just like the wood structure.
Wow.
So I hope people take it seriously.
And there is a tendency, I think we open with this would be my final question, but there is a tendency not to take it seriously, almost a sort of pioneer spirit that we will deal with this. We will see this out. We will weather the storm. I suppose literally.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that really hit home was the Hurricane Helene up where it hit north, close to Tallahassee. One of the news reports I heard up there was that they were saying make sure to write your name on your body if you stay, so you can be identified. And that's what I'm hearing people say now is if you're along the coast. So I saw people in our Facebook group recently saying, make sure if you get water, if you stayed and you get water, take an axe or a chainsaw to the attic so you can get out, and a rope, and make sure you write and marker your name so you can be identified.
Well, I'm glad you're safe. Long may you remain so, Carrie. Carrie Wardad, live from Orlando, whence she has evacuated from the Tampa area, which, as you just heard, that was quite striking. Sometimes it's not the stuff you expect to learn from an interview like that stays with you. The fact that if you are in Florida, you call these hurricanes by the name. You just call them Helene, you just call them Milton, call them, I don't know, John. Whereas we give it the full furniture, don't we, of apocalyptic event. Hurricane Helene. If you did miss any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's Sheila Fogus. 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 Now it's
in the round where zeros meet ones, a symphony of brilliance begun, where beauty sparks in digital skies, a genius soul takes flight. In algorithms, the dreams unfold, a tapestry of stories told. In circuits humming the cosmic tune, they navigate the stars and moon. All binary brilliance shining bright in the dance of electrons' light. A